The glaring lights of the Meridian Development boardroom swirled before Sarah Chen's eyes. Her pristine white suit jacket tightened around her chest, making it difficult to breathe. On the massive projection screen, images of the Pineview Mobile Home Park appeared in sharp detail. The pale blue rooftops, the snow-covered playground, and the faces of residents. Then suddenly, like a punch to the gut, she saw them. Jake with his tired smile, and Tommy with his wide, hopeful eyes. As you can see, the project will generate an estimated $47 million in first-year profits. Richard Parker's voice echoed from somewhere distant. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, I believe this is the perfect time to... The room began to tilt. Sarah felt cold sweat running down her spine. The faces around the conference table blurred. She tried to stand, but her knees gave out. Miss Chen, are you all right? The world around Sarah went dark as she collapsed to the floor. 3 months earlier, the snowstorm hit Millbrook like a frozen fist, turning Christmas Eve into a battlefield of ice and wind. Jake's pickup truck crawled through the blizzard headlights, cutting through the white chaos as 8-year-old Tommy slept against the passenger door. Jake Miller tightened his grip on the steering wheel, exhausted after his extra shift at Peterson's auto shop. The numbers kept spinning in his head. Rent, Lisa's remaining medical bills, and the Christmas gift Tommy had been longing for. 2 years after Lisa's passing, the financial burdens hadn't eased. As the truck rounded a curve on Highway 9, Jake saw her, a figure in white crumpled on the roadside like a broken angel. She should have been dead. The temperature was dropping to -15, and she'd been lying there God knows how long. Jake pulled over, drawing his coat tighter around himself. Tommy Dad stepping outside for a moment. Stay in the truck, okay? The boy only murmured, still deep in sleep. The wind cut into Jake's face like a knife as he trudged through the snow. The woman lay motionless, her skin a pale blue. But when Jake touched her wrist, he felt a pulse, weak but steady. Her white cashmere coat probably cost more than Jake made in 3 months. And that watch, even in the dim light, he could see it was expensive. Real. When Jake carried the woman to his truck, her lips moved, whispering something that made his blood freeze. The contract. They can't know I'm here. Jake adjusted the rearview mirror and spoke quietly to her unconscious form. I don't know who you are, lady, but you're coming with me. Tommy stirred as Jake settled the stranger into the truck's cab. The boy's dark hair stuck up at odd angles, his warm brown eyes like his mother's, opening wide with curiosity. Is she okay, Dad? Jake cranked up the heater, feeling the warm air begin to circulate in the truck. I don't know, son, but we're going to help her. Pineview Mobile Home Park wasn't much to look at on a good day. Tonight, with snow piling up against the skirting and Christmas lights flickering in the wind, it looked like the edge of the world. Jake pulled into the narrow driveway beside their faded blue mobile home with the small wooden porch he'd built himself. Inside, the small home welcomed them with warmth. Jake carefully laid the woman on the couch, clearing away the pieces of the mountain scene puzzle he and Tommy had been working on. Her pulse was stronger now, but her skin was still too cold. He sent Tommy for blankets while he searched her coat pockets for identification. No purse, no wallet, nothing. Just a single business card tucked deep in an inner pocket, so water damage the writing was illegible. What's her name, Dad? Tommy asked, carefully tucking a quilt around the woman's shoulders. It was the quilt his mother had made, the one with tiny blue flowers that matched the curtains. Jake felt that familiar tightness in his chest whenever reminders of Lisa surfaced unexpectedly. She'd been gone 2 years now, but her presence still filled their small home in ways that both comforted and haunted him. I don't know, buddy, Jake said, smoothing the woman's damp hair away from her face. But she's safe now. He made hot chocolate for Tommy and coffee for himself, moving quietly around the narrow kitchen. The woman didn't stir, even when the ancient refrigerator kicked on with its usual mechanical groan. Around midnight, she opened her eyes. Jake was dozing in the recliner, Tommy long since asleep in his bed, when he heard her voice. Where am I? She sounded confused, disoriented. Jake sat up, studying her face in the dim light from the kitchen. She was younger than he'd first thought, maybe early 30s, with dark hair and sharp features that belonged in a magazine, not his living room. You're safe, Jake said, the same words he'd used with Tommy. I found you on the highway. Do you remember what happened? The woman tried to sit up, wincing as if her head hurt. She looked around the small room, taking in the mismatched furniture, and the pile of Tommy's toys in the corner. Her gaze lingered on the Christmas tree, a scraggly pine Jake had cut from behind the grocery store and decorated with handmade ornaments. She pressed her fingertips to her temples. I remember driving, the snow was getting worse and I pulled over to make a call. After that, she shook her head. Nothing. I'm sorry, I don't even remember my name. Jake had heard of trauma causing memory loss, but seeing it was different. The woman looked genuinely frightened, as if she'd woken up in someone else's life. It's okay, Jake said, though he wasn't sure if it was. Memory can come back gradually. The important thing is you're alive. He stood up, moving to the kitchen to get her some water. I'm Jake Miller. That's my son, Tommy. He's asleep in the back room. You're welcome to stay until you remember. Well, until you remember anything. The woman accepted the water, gratefully drinking it slowly. Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me. She paused, studying Jake's face. You didn't have to stop. Jake shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. He'd done what anyone would do, what he hoped someone would do for Tommy if the situation were reversed. That's how he'd been raised, how Lisa had lived her life. Can't leave someone to freeze, Jake said simply. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. Meanwhile, over 100 miles away in a high-rise office tower downtown, the lights were still on in the executive floor of Meridian Development. Richard Parker, the executive vice president, stared at the silent phone on the desk. She's still not answering, he said to the young woman seated across from him, Sarah Chen's assistant. When was the last time you spoke with her? Around 7 p.m. when she was driving to Millbrook, the assistant answered, worry evident on her face. She said she would check the situation on the ground before signing the final eviction notices. Richard walked to the floor-to-ceiling glass window, looking out at the glittering city beneath the snowstorm. Below, the car lights looked like tiny worms crawling through cleared streets. Has the police been notified? Yes, but they said they can't do anything until she's been missing for at least 24 hours. With this weather, Richard turned back, his face hardening. The Millbrook project needs to be completed on schedule. The investors are watching. The board is watching. If Sarah doesn't show up tomorrow morning. He didn't finish the sentence, but the meaning was clear. The boardroom fell silent, with only the ticking of the expensive wall clock. Morning came with Tommy's voice cutting through the quiet. Dad, the snow lady's awake. Jake opened his eyes to find his son peering around the doorframe, stage whispering loud enough to wake the dead. The woman, Jake really needed to call her something, was sitting up on the couch looking far more alert than she had the night before. Good morning, she said to Tommy, who approached cautiously. You must be Tommy. Your father told me about you. Tommy nodded seriously as if he were meeting visiting royalty. Jake watched the interaction from the kitchen as he prepared breakfast. There was something about the way the woman spoke to Tommy, gentle but direct, treating him like a person rather than a child. Do you remember anything else? Jake asked, setting a plate of scrambled eggs in front of her. She ate slowly as if she were trying to remember how food was supposed to taste. Fragments, she said finally. I remember an argument. Someone was angry with me about something important, and I remember feeling like I had to get away. Tommy perked up at this, his 8-year-old brain latching onto the mystery. Like an adventure story, he asked. Maybe you're a secret agent or a princess in disguise. The woman laughed, a sound that filled the small trailer with unexpected warmth. I don't think I'm a princess, she said. But I suppose we'll find out together. Jake spent the morning making calls to the sheriff's department, to the hospital, to anyone who might have reported a missing person. No one had. It was as if the woman had simply materialized in the snowstorm with no past and no one looking for her. That's strange, Deputy Barnes said when Jake called for the third time. Usually someone notices when a person goes missing, especially around Christmas. The woman listened to Jake's phone calls with growing anxiety. What if no one's looking for me? She asked when he hung up. What if I don't have anyone? Jake didn't have an answer for that. He'd grown up in Millbrook, knew every family for 3 counties. But this woman was a complete mystery, and mysteries made him nervous. Tommy, however, was delighted. He appointed himself the woman's guide to their small world, showing her his room, his toys, the pictures of his mother that Jake kept on the mantel. That's Mommy, Tommy explained matter-of-factly. She died when I was 6, but Daddy says she's still watching over us. The woman's face softened as she studied Lisa's photograph. She's beautiful, the woman said quietly. She looks kind. Jake felt that familiar tightness in his chest. Lisa had been kind almost to a fault. She'd been the type of person who brought casseroles to new neighbors and remembered everyone's birthday. The type of person who would have invited a stranger to stay as long as needed, no questions asked. By afternoon, the woman had chosen a name for herself. Sarah, she said as if testing how it sounded. I think my name is Sarah. Jake wasn't sure if she remembered or if she was just tired of being called the woman, but Sarah seemed to fit. She helped with small tasks around the trailer, folding laundry and washing dishes, with the careful attention of someone learning a new skill. Tommy was fascinated by Sarah's obvious unfamiliarity with everyday tasks. Don't you know how to use a can opener? He asked, watching her struggle with a can of green beans. Sarah laughed, a sound that was becoming more frequent. I'm apparently not very domestic, she said. I must have had people who did these things for me. That evening, Jake found Sarah standing on the small porch looking out at the snow-covered trailer park. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crystalline world that transformed even the most humble homes into something magical. It's beautiful, she said when Jake joined her. I don't think I've ever really noticed snow before. Hard to miss in December, Jake said, though he found himself seeing their neighborhood through Sarah's eyes. The Christmas lights strung between trailers, the smoke rising from chimneys, the sound of laughter from the Reynolds place where the extended family was gathering. It wasn't much, but it was home. Sarah pulled her borrowed coat tighter around her shoulders. I keep having this feeling that I'm supposed to be somewhere else, that people are waiting for me. I am. She paused, studying Jake's profile. But I also feel like I've been running from something for a very long time. And for the first time in as long as I can remember, I'm not running anymore. Jake understood that feeling. After Lisa died, he'd felt like he was constantly moving, trying to stay ahead of the grief that threatened to overwhelm him. It was only when he learned to be still, to let Tommy's laughter and the rhythm of daily life carry him forward, that he'd found peace. Sometimes stopping is the bravest thing you can do, he said. That night, as Jake prepared for bed, he found the local newspaper he had placed on the kitchen table. The headline dominated the front page. New development project could change the face of Millbrook. Beneath it was a photograph of a young woman in a business suit with sleek dark hair and sharp eyes. The caption read, Sarah Chen, CEO of Meridian Development, spearheads multi-million-dollar project. Jake picked up the newspaper, his hands beginning to shake as he studied the photograph. Though her hair was styled differently and she wore professional attire, there was no mistaking it. This was the woman sleeping on his couch. Jake carefully folded the newspaper and tucked it into a drawer. He leaned against the kitchen counter, his heart racing. The woman he had rescued wasn't just a stranger. She was the CEO of the company, secretly buying up their land. The company that was rumored to be planning to evict the entire Pineview mobile home park. Light from the living room spilled into the kitchen as Sarah turned over on the couch, still deep in sleep. Jake looked at her, suddenly feeling as if he had invited a wolf into his home. The first rays of morning sunshine filtered through the thin curtains of the trailer, casting a warm glow across Sarah's face. She'd been with Jake and Tommy for 3 days now, and the rhythm of their small household had begun to feel strangely familiar. Each morning, Tommy would burst from his room with the boundless energy of an 8-year-old, and Jake would quietly prepare breakfast before heading to work. Today, though, Jake lingered by the kitchen counter, stealing glances at Sarah while pretending to read the newspaper. Sarah noticed, of course. She'd become acutely aware of Jake's shifting behavior since yesterday. The way his eyes followed her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion, how he'd begun to choose his words more carefully around her. Something had changed, but her fractured memory offered no clues as to what it might be. I was thinking, Jake said, folding the newspaper away from the front page. Maybe we should get you some fresh clothes. Mrs. Henderson next door is about your size. I'm sure she wouldn't mind lending you something. Sarah glanced down at the oversized flannel shirt and sweatpants she'd been wearing since her arrival. That would be nice, thank you. And then maybe, Jake hesitated, maybe we should take you into town. Someone might recognize you. There it was again, that strange undercurrent in his voice. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter weather. The prospect of going into town, of being recognized, filled her with inexplicable dread. Images flashed through her mind. A boardroom, angry voices, papers being slammed onto a table. I'd rather not, she said quickly. Then seeing Jake's raised eyebrow added, "Not yet anyway, I still feel disoriented." Tommy, oblivious to the tension, piped up from his bowl of cereal. "Can Sarah come to my school today? It's show and tell." Jake choked on his coffee. "Tommy, Sarah isn't a toy you can bring to school. But she's the coolest thing that's happened to us since Ringo the raccoon got stuck in our chimney." Sarah couldn't help but laugh, the tension momentarily broken. "I think I'll have to hear about Ringo the raccoon sometime. But your dad's right, Tommy. Besides, I should stay here and recover." Jake checked his watch and grimaced. "I'm running late. Listen, I called in a favor. My friend Dr. Mitchell is coming by around noon to check on you. He's discreet." "A doctor?" Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. "Is that really necessary?" "You were unconscious in freezing temperatures 3 days ago," Jake said flatly. "Yes, it's necessary. And it's either him or the hospital." After Jake left for work and Tommy for school, Sarah found herself alone in the trailer for the first time. She moved slowly from room to room, taking inventory. The place was small but meticulously maintained, a testament to Jake's careful nature. Photos of Tommy and a woman who must be Lisa adorned the walls. School projects, a calendar marked with Tommy's activities, a stack of bills carefully organized on the desk. In the tiny bathroom, Sarah studied her reflection in the mirror. The face looking back at her was familiar, yet strange, like a photograph of someone she once knew. Dark eyes, high cheekbones, the slight furrow between her brows that suggested habitual concentration. Who was she? What kind of life had she led before the snow and darkness? The business card Jake had found in her coat pocket lay on the bathroom counter, its text rendered illegible by water damage. She picked it up, turning it over in her hands. There was something about the cream color, the weight of the cardstock that felt significant, important. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. Through the small window, she could see a tall man with salt and pepper hair standing on the porch, a medical bag in hand. Dr. Mitchell, she presumed. Sarah hesitated, then opened the door. "Ms. Sarah, is it?" The doctor extended his hand. "I'm Alan Mitchell. Jake asked me to check on you." "He mentioned you'd be coming," Sarah said, stepping aside to let him in. "Though I assure you I'm feeling much better." Mitchell set his bag down on the coffee table. "Jake tells me you've had some memory loss. That can be quite serious. May I?" The examination was thorough but quick. Blood pressure, pupils, reflexes, a series of cognitive questions. Sarah answered everything with growing confidence, surprising herself with the medical terminology that came easily to her lips. "You seem to know quite a bit about medicine," Dr. Mitchell commented, wrapping up his stethoscope. "Do I?" Sarah felt another piece of herself click into place. I think I might have had some medical training, or maybe I just read a lot." Dr. Mitchell wrote something in his notebook. "Your physical health seems fine considering what you've been through. The memory loss is concerning but not uncommon after trauma. It could return gradually or all at once, or it might never return," Sarah finished. The doctor nodded gravely. "That's a possibility, yes, but there's something else, something Jake asked me to look into. He's concerned about your identity." Sarah felt her body tense. "What do you mean?" "Well, it's just that, Doctor." Mitchell hesitated, studying her face carefully. "Jake thinks he might know who you are, and if he's right, it's complicated." Before Sarah could press further, the doctor's phone rang. He checked it, frowned, and stood it up. "I'm sorry, but I have to take this. Emergency at the clinic. We'll have to continue this conversation another time." After the doctor left, Sarah paced the small living room, mind racing. Jake thought he knew who she was, and whatever he suspected was concerning enough that he'd discussed it with his doctor friend. She needed answers. The kitchen drawer where Jake had hidden the newspaper the night before was slightly ajar. Sarah pulled it open and froze. There on the front page was her face, professionally styled, dressed in an expensive suit expression, confident and commanding. The headline read, "New development project could change the face of Millbrook." Sarah Chen, CEO of Meridian Development. She read aloud, the words echoing strangely in the empty trailer. A flood of memories crashed over her. Board meetings, property acquisitions, heated negotiations. Meridian Development, her company. She'd built it from nothing, turned it into one of the most aggressive real estate development firms in the state. And Millbrook. Millbrook was her latest project, a small dying town with prime lakefront property ripe for transformation into an upscale resort community. Sarah sank onto a kitchen chair, her legs suddenly weak. If she was Sarah Chen, CEO of Meridian Development, then this trailer park, Pine View, was part of her project. These people, these homes, her company was planning to demolish them all, including Jake and Tommy's home. The front door opened, startling Sarah from her revelation. Jake stood in the doorway, snow dusting his shoulders, his expression unreadable as he saw the newspaper in her hands. "You know," he said simply. "I just found out," Sarah replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jake, Save it." His voice was hard, colder than she'd heard it before. "I knew there was something familiar about you the moment I saw your picture. You're the one who's been buying up land around Millbrook. You're the reason half the town is terrified of losing their homes." "I don't remember any of it," Sarah protested, even as more memories filtered back. Spreadsheets, profit projections, demolition timelines. "Convenient," Jake said, removing his coat and hanging it by the door with deliberate care. "Memory loss right when you're about to evict an entire community. That's not fair." "Fair," Jake laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "You want to talk about fair? My neighbors, good people who've lived here for decades, are about to lose everything they have because your company decided our lives are worth less than a fancy resort." Sarah felt sick. The more she remembered about her life as CEO, the more she understood Jake's anger. Meridian's approach was always the same. Identify undervalued properties purchased quietly through shell companies, then announce the development once opposition was impossible. "I need to go," Sarah said suddenly, standing up. "I shouldn't be here." "Where exactly would you go?" Jake crossed his arms. "Back to your corporate office, to sign the eviction notices." "I don't know," Sarah's voice rose in frustration. "I don't remember everything, Jake. Just pieces. Enough to know that I'm not the person you thought I was, and definitely not the person Tommy thinks I am." The mention of Tommy seemed to soften something in Jake's posture. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. "Tommy's staying at a friend's tonight. School project." He fixed her with a steady gaze. "Which means you and I have time to figure this out. Starting with you telling me everything you remember about Meridian Development and what exactly you were planning to do to our town." As night fell, Sarah and Jake sat across from each other at the small kitchen table, mugs of coffee growing cold between them. For hours, Sarah had been piecing together fragments of her memory, recounting what she knew about Meridian and the Millbrook project. The more she spoke, the more came back to her. Not everything, but enough to paint a troubling picture. "The resort development was my idea," she admitted, staring into her coffee. "Luxury accommodations, golf course, marina. The projections showed a 30% return on investment within 5 years. And the people who already live here. What did your projections say about us?" Sarah winced. "Relocation packages, minimal legally required compensation." She looked up, meeting Jake's eyes. "I remember thinking it was just business, nothing personal." "It's always personal when it's your home," Jake said quietly. A gust of wind rattled the windows, reminding them of the storm that had brought them together. Sarah wrapped her hands around her mug, seeking warmth. "What I don't understand," Jake continued, "is what you were doing on that road during the blizzard. According to the newspaper, the deal was already done." Sarah frowned, concentrating. "I remember driving to Millbrook. There was a meeting. I was supposed to finalize something. But there was also an argument before I left. With Richard Parker, my VP. About what? I'm not sure. Something about the project, about..." Sarah pressed her fingers to her temples, frustrated by the gaps in her memory. "About changes to the plan, something that wasn't part of the original agreement." Jake leaned forward. "What kind of changes?" Before Sarah could answer, headlights swept across the window as a vehicle pulled into the driveway. Jake frowned, checking his watch. "Are you expecting someone?" Sarah asked. "No." Jake moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. "It's a black SUV, tinted windows." Sarah felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. "Jake, I think..." The knock that came was sharp, authoritative. Jake gave Sarah a questioning look, then moved to answer the door. Sarah stayed in the kitchen, out of sight, but within earshot. "Can I help you?" Jake's voice was neutral, guarded. Good evening. I'm Richard Parker, Executive Vice President of Meridian Development. I'm looking for Sarah Chen. I have reason to believe she might be here. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Richard. The pieces were falling into place now. His insistence on accelerating the Millbrook project, the mysterious changes to the development plan, the argument before she left. Don't know anyone by that name, Jake replied coolly. Mr. Miller, isn't it? Richard's voice oozed false congeniality. One of our records indicates you live here with your son. Tommy Wright, charming community you have. It would be a shame if anything happened to accelerate the transition period. The threat hung in the air, unmistakable. Sarah felt something shift within her. A protective instinct, a surge of anger. She stepped into view. Hello, Richard. Richard Parker's expression shifted from smug to surprised, then quickly back to controlled. He was exactly as Sarah remembered him. Tall, impeccably dressed, with a sharp smile that never reached his eyes. Sarah, thank God you're all right. Everyone's been worried sick. His gaze flicked between Sarah and Jake. What are you doing in this place? Recovering, Sarah replied coolly. I had an accident during the storm. Mr. Miller was kind enough to help me. Richard's smile tightened. Well, your Good Samaritan act is appreciated, Mr. Miller, but Sarah needs to come with me now. We have urgent business matters to attend to. Jake crossed his arms. She's not going anywhere unless she wants to. Richard laughed, the sound brittle in the cold air. I don't think you understand the situation. Sarah is the CEO of a multi-million-dollar corporation. Her absence has caused considerable disruption. The board is concerned. The board, Sarah repeated, another memory clicking into place. The emergency board meeting you held while I was on my way to Millbrook. The one you didn't want me to attend. Richard's smile faltered. You're confused, Sarah. The trauma of your accident? The trauma of my accident has actually cleared some things up. Sarah interrupted, stepping closer. Like why you were so insistent that I sign off on the revised Millbrook development before the board meeting. What was it you added to the plan, Richard? The part you knew I wouldn't approve. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Richard's face there and gone in an instant. This isn't the place to discuss corporate matters. Come back to the city with me and we can sort everything out. I don't think so, Sarah said firmly. In fact, I think I need to take a closer look at those revised plans. And the board needs to hear directly from me about what's been happening. Richard's facade of friendliness disappeared entirely. Don't be foolish, Sarah. You've worked too hard to throw it all away over some misplaced sentimentality. He gestured dismissively at the trailer at Jake. This isn't your world. Maybe not, Sarah acknowledged, but neither is yours anymore. Richard's expression hardened. The board meeting is tomorrow at 9. If you're not there with signed approval for the Millbrook development as planned, I'll have no choice but to inform them of your mental incapacity. Your little accident has provided the perfect opportunity for a leadership change. Is that a threat? Jake stepped forward, but Sarah placed a hand on his arm. It's fine, Jake. She met Richard's cold gaze with one of her own. I'll be at the meeting, Richard, but not with the approval you're expecting. Richard studied her for a long moment, then nodded curtly. We'll see. 9 o'clock, Sarah. Don't be late. He turned and walked back to his SUV without another word. As the black vehicle pulled away, Sarah felt her knees weaken. Jake guided her back inside, closing the door against the cold night air. You okay? He asked, concern replacing the earlier hostility in his voice. Sarah sank onto the couch, her mind racing. I remember now, the revised plan. Richard added a chemical processing plant to the development, disguised as an eco-friendly manufacturing facility in the paperwork. He has connections to biosynth industries. Biosynth. Jake's expression darkened. They've been trying to build here for years. The county keeps blocking them because of environmental concerns. Exactly. Richard found a workaround. Bundle it with our luxury development. Use Meridian's influence to push it through. The potential profit is enormous, but the environmental impact. Sarah shook her head. It would destroy the lake, the groundwater. That's why I was coming to Millbrook, to see the site myself before making a final decision. Jake sat beside her, processing this new information. And now Richard is forcing your hand. He thinks he is, Sarah said, a new determination in her voice. But he's underestimating me. I built Meridian from nothing. I know how to fight. Why would you, Jake asked quietly. Fight, I mean. A week ago, you were ready to demolish Pine View for a luxury resort. What's changed? Sarah looked around the small trailer, at the puzzle pieces still scattered on the coffee table, at Tommy's drawings, stuck to the refrigerator, at the worn but carefully mended furniture. Then her gaze settled on Jake with his honest eyes and capable hands. I've changed, she said simply. Or maybe I've remembered who I was before Meridian became everything. Either way, I can't let Richard do this. Not to Millbrook, not to Pineview. She hesitated, then added softly, not to you and Tommy. Jake held her gaze for a long moment. The anger and suspicion that had dominated his expression earlier had given way to something else. A cautious trust, perhaps, or the beginning of understanding. So what now, he asked. Sarah took a deep breath. Now I need to get to that board meeting. But first I need to understand exactly what Richard's been doing in my absence. I need access to Meridian's files. And how do you plan to do that? A slow smile spread across Sarah's face, confident, determined, a glimpse of the CEO she had been. Well, as it happens, I know someone with a particular talent for fixing things that are broken. How are you with computers, Jake? Jake matched her smile with one of his own. I might know a thing or two, and I happen to have a friend who knows even more. For the first time since discovering her identity, Sarah felt a spark of hope. The woman in the newspaper photo and the woman sitting in Jake's living room were both her, different sides of the same person, and perhaps, just perhaps, she could use the power of one to protect the other. Tomorrow's going to be interesting, Jake said, reaching for his phone. Yes, Sarah agreed, feeling a strange sense of anticipation rather than dread. I believe it will. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and silent in the darkness. But this time, Sarah wasn't lost in the storm. This time, she knew exactly where she needed to go. The low hum of a laptop fan filled Jake's living room as Claire Patterson typed furiously, her fingers dancing across the keyboard with practiced precision. The digital glow illuminated her concentrated face, gray-streaked hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Sarah watched over her shoulder, occasionally pointing at the screen and whispering instructions. Jake returned from the kitchen with 3 mugs of coffee, carefully distributing them across the cluttered coffee table. It was nearly midnight, and Tommy was fast asleep in his room, blissfully unaware of the conspiracy unfolding in their living room. Any luck? Jake asked, settling into the worn armchair opposite the women. Claire looked up, pushing her glasses higher on her nose. Your CEO friend knows her security protocols. I'll give her that. Meridian's system is tighter than Fort Knox. Former security protocols, Sarah corrected, a small smile playing at her lips. I changed everything last quarter after a phishing attempt, including, she leaned forward, typing a complex string of characters into a dialog box. This back door I built in case of emergencies. Claire's eyebrows shot up as the screen suddenly filled with folders and files. Well, that's one way to do it. Jake shook his head in amazement. Remind me never to play poker with you. Sarah's smile faded as she scanned the directories. We need to find the Millbrook development plans, specifically anything modified in the last month. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, navigating through the digital labyrinth of Meridian Development's servers. Claire watched with professional admiration. You know, when Jake called and said he needed help hacking into a corporate server for his amnesia-stricken houseguest, I thought he'd finally lost it. Now I'm thinking you might be the most interesting thing that's happened to Millbrook since the Great Flood of '97. I'm still not convinced I haven't lost it, Jake muttered, but there was no real bite to his words. The initial anger he'd felt upon discovering Sarah's identity had evolved into something more complex, a cautious alliance born of necessity, and if he was honest with himself, a growing respect for the determination she'd shown since Richard's visit. Here, Sarah said suddenly, her voice sharp with discovery. She opened a folder labeled Millbrook Phase 2, Confidential. Inside were dozens of documents, spreadsheets, and design files. These weren't part of the original plan. For the next hour, they combed through the digital evidence of Richard's deception. Environmental impact studies conveniently modified to downplay risks. Zoning applications filed under subsidiary names to avoid scrutiny. Chemical storage specifications hidden within innocuous-looking architectural plans. This is worse than I thought, Sarah said, scrolling through a document detailing projected chemical output. Biosynth isn't just planning a small processing facility. This would be their largest operation in the state. Claire's expression hardened. They tried to build something similar near Westfield 3 years ago. The county shut it down after environmental groups proved it would contaminate the watershed. I covered it for the local paper. Teacher and journalist, Sarah asked. Small towns. Claire shrugged. Everyone wears multiple hats. And speaking of which, she turned to Jake. This is exactly the kind of story the Millbrook Gazette needs. With your permission, I'd like to start digging into Biosynth's history and their connection to Meridian. Jake nodded. Do it, but be careful. These people play hardball. I'm counting on it, Claire replied with a determined smile. She began copying files to her flash drive, organizing them by relevance. Sarah turned to Jake, her voice low. I need to be at that board meeting tomorrow. It's the only way to stop this. In what clothes? Jake gestured to her borrowed flannel and jeans. You can't exactly walk into a corporate boardroom dressed like that, no offense. None taken, but you're right. Sarah bit her lip, thinking. My apartment in the city would have what I need, but I can't risk going there. Richard might have someone watching it. What about your assistant? Jake suggested. The one Richard mentioned. Could you trust her? Sarah's face brightened. Mia, yes, she's been with me since the beginning. If anyone would help me without alerting Richard, it's her. She reached for her phone before remembering. I don't have a phone. Use mine, Claire offered, sliding her cell across the table. But don't call from it directly. Too easily traced. Use the secure messaging app, the one with the blue icon. As Sarah composed a carefully worded message to her assistant, Jake stepped outside onto the small porch. The night was clear now, stars visible through gaps in the pine trees surrounding the trailer park. He needed a moment to process everything. The revelation of Sarah's identity, Richard's toxic plan for Millbrook, and most confusing of all, his own conflicted feelings toward the woman who just days ago had represented everything he despised about corporate greed. The door creaked open behind him, and Sarah joined him on the porch, wrapping one of Lisa's old cardigans tighter around herself against the cold. Mia's in, she said quietly. She'll bring everything I need to a diner halfway between here and the city. No questions asked. Jake nodded, still looking at the stars. You trust her that much? With my life, Sarah confirmed. She's like family. Family. The word hung between them, loaded with meaning. Jake hadn't used it since Lisa died, couldn't bring himself to think of their little unit as anything but broken. Yet somehow Tommy had immediately accepted Sarah as a potential addition to their fragmented family, with the simple, unquestioning faith of childhood. Your son is remarkable, Sarah said as if reading his thoughts. The way he sees the world, the way he cares about people. You've done an amazing job with him, Jake. I can't take all the credit. He's got a lot of his mother in him. And Sarah was quiet for a moment. Will you tell me about her, about Lisa? The request surprised him. Few people asked about Lisa anymore, as if mentioning her name might shatter him. But tonight, under the winter stars with the smell of pine in the air, Jake found he wanted to talk about her. We met in high school. She was the smartest person I knew. Valedictorian, full scholarship to state college. Everyone thought she'd leave Millbrook and never look back. But she came home after graduation, said small towns needed educated people too. Jake smiled at the memory. She taught third grade at Millbrook Elementary for 10 years. Some of her students are in Tommy's class now. She sounds wonderful, Sarah said softly. She was. When she got sick, she worried more about Tommy and me than herself. Made me promise to keep going, to give Tommy a good life. Jake's voice roughened. Some days I'm not sure I'm keeping that promise very well. Sarah turned to face him fully. From what I've seen, you're keeping it beautifully, Jake. Tommy is happy, secure, loved. That's what matters. Their eyes met in the dim porch light, and Jake felt something shift between them, a moment of genuine connection, transcending the complicated circumstances that had brought them together. For a heartbeat, they weren't CEO and mechanic, or even adversaries united by common cause. They were simply two people standing on the edge of something neither had anticipated. Claire's voice broke the moment. You two better come see this, she called from inside. I found something in the financial reports you're not going to believe. Back at the laptop, Claire had pulled up a spreadsheet detailing Meridian's property acquisitions in Millbrook over the past 18 months. Look at this, she pointed to a highlighted section. Meridian hasn't just been buying residential properties. They've been systematically acquiring businesses, land parcels, even water rights throughout the county, all through different shell companies to avoid raising alarms. Sarah leaned closer, scanning the data with growing concern. This goes way beyond the resort development I approved. It gets worse. Claire continued, clicking to another document. These geological surveys were commissioned by Biosynth 3 years ago. They're labeled Preliminary Assessment, Millbrook Basin Extraction Potential. Jake's blood ran cold. Extraction. They're not just building a processing plant. They're planning to mine here. For lithium, Claire confirmed grimly. These surveys suggest the entire Millbrook Basin sits on one of the largest lithium deposits in the country. With electric vehicle production ramping up, lithium is more valuable than gold. Sarah sank onto the couch, the full weight of the discovery hitting her. That's why Richard was so insistent on this project. The resort was just a cover. Biosynth wants the lithium and they're using Meridian to get the land. And you, Jake added quietly, they're using you too. Sarah's expression hardened. Not anymore. As dawn broke over Pineview, Jake helped Sarah pack a small bag with essentials for her meeting with Mia. Claire had left hours earlier, armed with copies of the incriminating documents and a promise to begin discreetly rallying local environmental groups. I should be back by this evening, Sarah said, zipping the bag closed, assuming the board meeting doesn't turn into a corporate coup. Jake frowned. Maybe I should come with you. That would only complicate things. Richard already knows we've connected. If you show up at Meridian, it would confirm his suspicions that I've switched in mine. She paused, considering her words. Besides, Tommy will be home from his sleepover soon. He needs you here. The mention of Tommy sobered Jake. In the rush of revelations and planning, he'd momentarily lost sight of the most important factor in his decisions, his son. What do I tell him about where you've gone? Jake asked. It was a loaded question, and they both knew it. Tommy had grown attached to Sarah with the spectacular speed of children accepting her presence in their home as if she'd always belonged there. Her sudden absence would require explanation. Tell him I had to take care of some business, but that I'll be back, Sarah replied, then hesitated. If that's still okay with you. Jake studied her face, searching for any trace of the corporate shark he'd glimpsed in that newspaper photo. Instead, he found only sincerity and a vulnerability that seemed at odds with the powerful CEO she was preparing to become again. It's okay with me, he said finally. Just be careful. Richard doesn't strike me as the type to lose gracefully. Sarah's smile was grim. He's not, but neither am I. The journey to meet Mia took Sarah through the heart of Millbrook, giving her a daylight view of the town she'd previously only evaluated through market reports and property assessments. Main Street was modestly decorated for the holiday season, with wreaths on lampposts and twinkle lights in shop windows. Despite the early hour, people moved with purpose, opening businesses, clearing sidewalks, greeting neighbors by name. This wasn't just real estate, Sarah realized. It was a community, one her company had been planning to dismantle piece by piece. The diner sat just off the highway, a retro silver structure with red booths visible through steamed windows. Sarah spotted Mia immediately sitting in a corner booth with her back to the wall, a garment bag and small suitcase beside her. Seeing her assistant's familiar face triggered another flood of memories, late nights reviewing contracts, early morning strategy sessions, the unwavering support through countless business challenges. You look different, were Mia's first words as Sarah slid into the booth opposite of her. No hug, no emotional reunion, just a careful assessment. I feel different, Sarah admitted. Mia pushed a cup of coffee toward her, prepared exactly as Sarah liked it, with 1 sugar and a splash of cream. The familiar taste grounded her, a sensory connection to her life before the accident. Richard's been telling everyone you had a nervous breakdown, Mia said, keeping her voice low despite the nearly empty diner. The board is concerned but divided. Some think you have been working too hard and need a break. Others are questioning whether a woman can handle the pressure of running Meridian. Sarah's jaw tightened. How predictable. He's also fast-tracked the Millbrook development. The environmental impact statements were mysteriously expedited, and he's scheduled a press conference for tomorrow to announce the project, including the biosynth facility. Mia's eyes widened slightly, the subtle expression shift that Sarah recognized as surprise. You know about that? I know everything, Mia, including the real reason biosynth is interested in Millbrook. Understanding dawned on Mia's face. The lithium deposits. I only found out myself 2 days ago when I overheard Richard on the phone with biosynth's CEO. They're planning something big, Sarah, bigger than a processing plant. An extraction operation that would effectively destroy the entire region, Sarah confirmed grimly. And they're using my company to make it happen. Mia studied her boss carefully. You've never cared about environmental impact before, or local opposition. What's changed? It was a fair question, and one Sarah had been asking herself since discovering her true identity. What had changed? Was it the memory loss that had temporarily separated her from the single-minded ambition that had built Meridian? Or was it something else? Something about Jake and Tommy and the simple dignity of their lives in Pineview. I have, Sarah said simply, and I need your help to stop this. Mia nodded without hesitation. Whatever you need. I didn't spend 5 years helping you build Meridian just to watch Richard Parker tear it down for a lithium mine. Sarah felt a surge of gratitude for her assistant's loyalty. First, I need to know exactly who on the board is aligned with Richard and who might still support me. For the next hour, they strategized with Mia providing critical intelligence about the power dynamics that had evolved during Sarah's absence. The garment bag revealed a pristine white suit, Sarah's trademark boardroom attire, along with the accessories and cosmetics needed to transform her back into the formidable CEO of Meridian Development. As they prepared to part ways, Mia handed Sarah a small box. Your phone with a new SIM card. Richard can't track it. And this, she slid a flash drive across the table, contains backup copies of all Meridian's files, including emails between Richard and Biosynth that mysteriously disappeared from the server last week. Sarah pocketed the flash drive. Thank you, Mia, for everything. Just doing my job, Mia replied with a small smile. Though I have to say this is the most interesting one we've had since that hostile takeover attempt last year. She hesitated, then added, the guy who found you, Jake Miller, he must be something special. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. It's not like that. He's just helped me see things differently. Uh-huh. Mia's knowing look spoke volumes. Well, whatever or whoever it is, I like this new Sarah. She reminds me of the one I met 5 years ago before Meridian became everything. The observation stayed with Sarah as she made her way back to Pineview, this time in a taxi Mia had arranged. The before Sarah that Mia remembered, the idealistic entrepreneur with dreams of building something meaningful. When had that woman disappeared, replaced by a ruthless CEO who evaluated communities solely by their profit potential? The taxi dropped her at the entrance to Pineview, the driver clearly confused by her request to be left at a trailer park while dressed in an outfit that probably cost more than his monthly salary. Sarah walked the remaining distance to Jake's trailer, the gravel crunching beneath her designer heels, enjoying the surprised glances from neighbors who had previously seen her only in borrowed flannel and jeans. She heard Tommy's excited voice before she saw him, the unmistakable high-pitched enthusiasm of a child sharing an important story. As Jake's trailer came into view, Sarah slowed her pace, taking in the scene through new eyes. The modest structure that had initially seemed so foreign to her now felt strangely like a sanctuary. The small wooden porch where she and Jake had stood beneath the stars. The window where Tommy pressed his nose against the glass each morning, checking for frost patterns. Tommy spotted her first, his game of catch with Jake, forgotten as he dropped the ball and sprinted toward her. Sarah, you're back, and you look like a movie star. Sarah knelt to meet his hug, careful not to topple in her heels. Hello, Tommy. I missed you. Dad said you had important business, but you'd come back. I told him you would because you promised to help me finish our puzzle, and you don't seem like a person who breaks promises. The simple faith in his statement caught Sarah off guard. When was the last time someone had trusted her word so completely without contracts or legal guarantees? Jake approached more slowly, his expression a complex mixture of relief and wariness. The sight of Sarah in her corporate armor, the tailored white suit, the perfect makeup, the sleek hairstyle seemed to have resurrected some of his initial suspicion. Welcome back, he said, his tone carefully neutral. Successful meeting? Very. Sarah confirmed, standing to face him. Mia came through with everything we need, including evidence of Richard's behind-the-scenes deals with Biosynth. Tommy looked between them, sensing the tension but not understanding its source. Is Sarah staying for dinner? Mrs. Henderson brought over her famous lasagna because she said you probably weren't feeding your guests proper food. Jake's serious expression cracked into a reluctant smile. Mrs. Henderson thinks no one in Millbrook knows how to cook except her. She might be right about that. Sarah teased, grateful for Tommy's innocent interruption of what could have become an awkward moment. As they walked toward the trailer, Tommy chattering about his sleepover adventure, Sarah felt a strange doubling of her identity. The CEO in the white suit overlaid with the woman who had found unexpected connection in this humble community. Both were real. Both were her. The question was, which would prevail tomorrow when she faced the Meridian board? Inside, the contrast between Sarah's current appearance and the modest surroundings was even more pronounced. She felt almost theatrical, like an actress who had wandered onto the wrong set still in costume. Jake seemed to sense her discomfort. Tommy, why don't you get washed up for dinner? And maybe set the table. When Tommy had disappeared into the bathroom, Meg turned to Sarah. So tomorrow's the big showdown. Sarah nodded, removing her suit jacket and draping it carefully over the back of a chair. 9 o'clock. Richard's expecting me to either not show up or to cave under pressure. He's in for a surprise. What exactly is your plan? Jake asked, concern evident in his voice. These people have a lot to lose if you expose them. That's precisely what I'm counting on, Sarah replied. The board cares about one thing above all else: profit. If I can prove that Richard's plan with Biosynth would ultimately damage Meridian's reputation and long-term viability, they'll side with me. And if they don't, Sarah's expression hardened, then I use my controlling interest to force the issue and deal with the fallout afterward. Jake looked impressed despite himself. You really are a CEO, aren't you? For better or worse, Sarah acknowledged with a small smile. They were interrupted by a knock at the door. Jake opened it to find Claire, her expression urgent. We have a problem, she announced without preamble, stepping inside. She stopped short at the sight of Sarah in her corporate attire. Wow, talk about a transformation. What's the problem? Sarah asked, instantly alert. Claire pulled out her phone, showing them a news alert. Biosynth just issued a press release announcing their eco-friendly manufacturing partnership with Meridian Development, with groundbreaking scheduled to begin next month. They're moving faster than we thought. Jake read the article over Sarah's shoulder, his body tense. They're not wasting any time. That's not all, Claire continued grimly. I did some digging into Biosynth's previous projects. 3 communities where they established operations experienced severe groundwater contamination within 5 years. One town was eventually abandoned entirely when the water became undrinkable. Sarah felt sick. And the lithium extraction would be even more damaging. Exponentially, Claire confirmed. Based on the geological surveys I found, they'd essentially be using acid to leach lithium from the soil across a massive area. The environmental impact would be catastrophic and irreversible. Tommy emerged from the bathroom, stopping when he sensed the serious mood. What's wrong? Is someone sick? Jake quickly pasted on a reassuring smile. Nobody, just grown-up talk. Why don't you go ahead and start setting the table? As Tommy disappeared into the kitchen, Claire lowered her voice. There's one more thing. I found a connection between Biosynth and Meridian that goes back further than we thought. They've partnered on projects before, quietly, through subsidiaries. That's not possible, Sarah frowned. I would have known. Claire handed her a folder. These documents suggest otherwise. The partnerships were structured through holding companies to maintain distance, but the money trail is clear if you know where to look. Sarah flipped through the pages, her confusion growing. The earliest document dated back 7 years, 2 years before she had founded Meridian. How could there be a connection that predated her company's existence? The last page made her blood run cold. It was a photograph of a younger Richard Parker shaking hands with Biosynth's CEO Harold Wells. Standing beside them, smiling broadly, was Sarah's father, Michael Chen. My father, Sarah whispered, memories flooding back with painful clarity. He worked for Biosynth before he died. He was their legal counsel for environmental compliance. Jake moved closer, concern in his eyes. Sarah, I remember now, she continued, her voice strained. My father helped Biosynth navigate environmental regulations, find loopholes. He was good at it, too good. When a community in Nevada tried to sue over contaminated water, he found a technicality that got the case dismissed. The pieces were falling into place with sickening logic. After the Nevada case, my father changed. He started drinking, became distant. One night he told me he'd done something unforgivable, that people were suffering because of him. A week later, he died in a car accident. Sarah's hands trembled as she held the photograph. I was 25. I used the life insurance money to start Meridian. And Richard, she looked up, meeting Jake's concerned gaze. Richard was my father's protege at Biosynth. He approached me after the funeral, offered to help with Meridian. I thought it was out of respect for my father. But it was really to continue the connection to Biosynth, Jake concluded grimly, to position Meridian as their land acquisition arm. Claire nodded. That's what these documents suggest. Biosynth has been using Meridian to acquire properties with valuable resources, all while maintaining plausible deniability. And I never knew, Sarah said, the betrayal cutting deep. I thought I built Meridian myself, but it was compromised from the beginning. Jake placed a hand on her shoulder, the gesture unexpectedly comforting. You didn't know, Sarah. I should have, she replied, anger replacing shock. My father tried to warn me in his way, and I've spent the last 5 years unknowingly continuing his mistakes. The revelation hung heavy in the room, changing everything. Sarah's fight was no longer just about stopping Richard's immediate plans for Millbrook. It was about reclaiming her company from influences that had corrupted it from its founding, about righting wrongs that extended back to her father's time. What are you going to do? Claire asked quietly. Before Sarah could answer, a crash from the kitchen shattered the tense silence. They rushed in to find Tommy standing frozen, a broken plate at his feet and tears welling in his eyes. I'm sorry, he whispered. I didn't mean to. But Jake wasn't looking at the broken plate. He was staring at the window where the curtain fluttered from a sudden draft. The glass was cracked, a small, neat hole at its center. Everyone down, Jake shouted, pulling Tommy to the floor just as another window shattered, this time in the living room. Claire dropped instinctively, crawling toward the hallway. Someone's shooting at the trailer. Sarah's corporate poise evaporated as pure fear took over. She scrambled toward Tommy, helping Jake shield him with their bodies. My phone, she gasped. In my jacket pocket. Call 911. Jake reached for the jacket draped over the nearby chair, retrieving the phone with shaking hands. As he dialed, Sarah held Tommy close, feeling his small body trembling against hers. It's okay, she whispered, though nothing about this situation was okay. We're going to be fine. Through the broken window, she could see a black SUV parked at the edge of the trailer park, the same vehicle Richard had arrived in earlier. As she watched, it pulled away, tires spinning in the gravel. The police are on their way, Jake reported, still keeping low. Are you both okay, Tommy? Tommy nodded, his face pale but composed. I'm okay, Dad, but I think the bad guys are after Sarah. The simple, childish assessment cut through Sarah's shock. Tommy was right, this attack wasn't random. Richard was sending a message, escalating from threats to violence now that he knew Sarah wasn't going to cooperate. And he'd endangered a child to do it. Something fundamental shifted within Sarah in that moment, watching Jake check Tommy for injuries, seeing the broken glass scattered across the modest kitchen they'd so carefully maintained. This wasn't just business anymore. This wasn't even about environmental protection or corporate ethics. This was personal. Richard Parker had just made the biggest mistake of his life. When the police arrived 10 minutes later, they found Jake, Tommy, Sarah, and Claire huddled in the bathroom, the only room without windows. The officers took statements, photographed the damage, and promised increased patrols around Pineview. But without witnesses who could directly identify the shooter, there was little immediate action they could take. You should all stay somewhere else tonight, the lead officer advised as he prepared to leave. Just as a precaution. Jake nodded grimly. We will. Thank you, Officer Davis. As the police cars pulled away, Mrs. Henderson appeared at the door, her face pinched with worry. Jake Miller, what on earth is happening? First you take in a mysterious woman, and now they're shooting. This isn't like you. It's complicated, Mrs. Henderson, Jake replied wearily. But you're right about one thing, we need to leave for a while. Could Tommy stay with you tonight? The older woman's expression softened immediately. Of course he can. He and my grandson can build that model rocket they've been talking about. She peered around Jake to where Tommy sat on the couch, unusually quiet. Come on, young man. I've got hot chocolate and cookies waiting. Tommy looked to his father for confirmation. Go ahead, buddy, Jake encouraged. I'll come get you in the morning. As Mrs. Henderson led Tommy away, the boy turned back suddenly. Sarah, you'll be careful, right? Promise? Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. I promise, Tommy. When they were gone, Jake began methodically boarding up the broken windows with pieces of plywood from his shed. Claire helped holding the boards in place while he hammered their movements, efficient and practiced, as if this wasn't the first crisis they'd weathered together. Sarah watched them work, feeling simultaneously part of their world and separate from it. In her white suit now smudged with dust from the floor, she was a stark visual reminder of the corporate forces that had brought danger to their door. I should go, she said finally. As long as I'm here, you're all at risk. Jake paused, hammer in mid-swing. And where exactly would you go? Back to your apartment where Richard probably has someone waiting, to a hotel where you'd be alone and vulnerable? I could. No, Jake said firmly, resuming his hammering. Running isn't the answer, especially not now. Claire nodded in agreement. Jake's right. We're in this together. Besides, I've already sent copies of everything we found to my editor at the Gazette and to a contact at the State Environmental Agency. If anything happens to any of us, it'll only confirm the story. Sarah felt a wave of gratitude for these people who had so quickly become her allies, her friends. Thank you, both of you. As darkness fell, Claire departed for her own home, promising to return in the morning to drive Sarah to the Meridian board meeting. Jake finished securing the trailer, then collapsed onto the couch, the adrenaline of the attack finally wearing off. Some Christmas holiday this is turning out to be, he said with a grim chuckle. Sarah sat beside him, removing her heels with a sigh of relief. I'm so sorry, Jake. I never meant to bring this kind of danger out to your home. I know, he said simply. Then after a pause, it's strange. A week ago, I was dreading Christmas, just trying to get through it for Tommy's sake. Now I'm involved in corporate espionage and environmental whistleblowing with bullets through my windows. Despite everything, Sarah laughed. When you put it that way, it does sound rather dramatic. Life with you is many things, Sarah Chen. Boring isn't one of them. The casual intimacy of the statement hung between them. Neither acknowledging the implied future, it suggested a life with you that extended beyond their current crisis. Instead, Sarah returned to the revelation that had been interrupted by the shooting. I still can't believe my father was involved with Biosynth, that my entire company might have been built as their puppet. Jake's expression grew serious. Do you really believe that everything you've built was just part of their plan? Sarah considered the question carefully. No, she said finally. Meridian became successful because I made it that way. I may have been blind to Richard's connections and motives, but the work we did, the developments we created, those were real, just misguided sometimes. Like Millbrook, she acknowledged. I was so focused on profit and growth that I never stopped to consider the human cost. Not until you ended up in a snowbank and woke up as someone else, Jake suggested with a small smile. Not until I met you and Tommy, Sarah corrected softly. Not until I experienced the community I was planning to destroy. Their eyes met, and the air between them seemed to charge with unspoken possibilities. Jake reached out slowly, brushing a strand of hair from her face with a gentleness that belied his calloused hands. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said, his voice low, whatever you decide to do about Meridian and Richard, you have a place here, if you want it. The offer, simple and profound, touched something deep within Sarah. A place, not just a physical location, but a belonging, a home. Before she could respond, Jake's phone rang, the harsh electronic tone shattering the moment. He checked the screen, frowning. It's the hospital, he said, answering quickly. Hello, yes, this is Jake Miller. Sarah watched his face transform from confusion to shock to fear. When how bad? Yes, I'll be right there. He ended the call, already reaching for his coat. What's happened? Sarah asked, dread pooling in her stomach. It's Tommy, Jake said, his voice tight with controlled panic. There's been an accident at Mrs. Henderson's. He fell from the porch roof. They were setting up that model rocket. He's in the emergency room. Oh God, Jake. Sarah grabbed her own coat. I'm coming with you. No. Jake's response was immediate and firm. You need to stay here, prepare for tomorrow. This could be exactly what Richard wants to distract you, throw you off balance before the board meeting. Sarah shook her head, then already pulling on her shoes. I don't care about the board meeting right now. Tommy is what matters. Jake paused at the door, surprised by her vehemence. Then wordlessly, he held the door open for her. As they rushed to Jake's truck, neither saw the dark sedan parked at the edge of the trailer park, its occupant watching through binoculars. Nor did they notice when it pulled out behind them, following at a discreet distance all the way to Millbrook General Hospital. The antiseptic smell of Millbrook General Hospital wrapped around Sarah like an unwelcome embrace. The emergency room buzzed with quiet efficiency, nurses moving between curtained areas, the occasional announcement over the PA system, the steady beep of monitors tracking vital signs. Jake paced the small waiting area, wearing a path in the linoleum with each turn. He should be fine, Mr. Miller, the nurse had assured them upon arrival. The doctor is examining him now. Looks like a broken arm and some bruising, but head CT came back clear. That had been 40 minutes ago. Each passing minute stretched Jake's nerves thinner, his face a mask of barely contained worry. Sarah sat quietly in the molded plastic chair, feeling simultaneously essential and intrusive. She was neither family nor close friend, yet somehow she couldn't imagine being anywhere else. Jake, she said softly, come sit down. Wearing a hole in the floor won't make the doctor come any faster. He stopped abruptly, as if suddenly remembering her presence. With a heavy sigh, Jake sank into the chair beside her, shoulders slumped with exhaustion and worry. I should have been there, he muttered, staring at his hands. I'm always the one who helps with his projects. Mrs. Henderson means well, but she doesn't know how to supervise an 8-year-old with a rocket. Sarah placed her hand over his, a gesture so natural it surprised her. Tommy's a resilient kid, and accidents happen even when you are watching. Jake glanced at their joined hands, then at Sarah's face. How did you get so good at this, calming people down, I mean? Practice, Sarah replied with a small smile. Corporate crises might not involve broken bones, but they do involve a lot of panicked people making rash decisions. The gentle teasing had its intended effect. Some of the tension eased from Jake's expression, the corner of his mouth twitching upward. I'm not making a rash decision. I'm calmly planning to ground him until he's 30. Before Sarah could respond, the double doors to the treatment area swung open. A doctor in green scrubs approached, clipboard in hand. Mr. Miller, I'm Dr. Rossi. Your son is doing well. Left radius fracture, clean break, no surgery needed. We've set it and put on a cast. He has some bruising on his right side where he landed, but nothing serious. No concussion, which is the good news. Jake exhaled heavily, relief washing over his features. Can I see him? Of course, he's asking for you, and... Rossi glanced at Sarah, questioning. Sarah, Jake supplied. She's with us. The simple declaration sent an unexpected warmth through Sarah's chest. With us, as if she belonged. Tommy looked small against the white hospital sheets, his left arm encased in a bright blue cast. His face lit up when he saw them enter. Dad, Sarah, look. He held up his casted arm proudly. DeRossi says I'm the first person to get a blue cast this week, and she said I was super brave when they said it. Jake moved quickly to the bedside, ruffling Tommy's hair, with a gentleness that belied his earlier anxiety. That's my tough guy, but maybe next time launch rockets from the ground, not the roof. Tommy's expression turned sheepish. Mrs. Henderson said we needed elevation for proper trajectory, but I slipped on the icy part. The important thing is you're okay, Sarah said, stepping closer. She was struck by how vulnerable Tommy looked, yet how resilient his spirit remained. That's a very impressive, Ken. Will you sign it? Tommy asked eagerly. You'll be the first. Dad can be second. I'd be honored, Sarah replied, accepting the marker a nurse had left on the bedside table. As she carefully wrote her name on the plaster, Sarah became aware of a subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. She glanced up to find Jake watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, something beyond gratitude or friendship, something that made her pulse quicken. The moment was interrupted by a commotion in the hallway. A familiar voice rose above the hospital's subdued murmur. I understand your privacy policies, but this is an emergency. Sarah Chen is missing, and we have reason to believe she may have been brought here. Richard Parker. Sarah straightened, exchanging an alarmed look with Jake. The board meeting was still hours away. Why was Richard here now? I need to handle this, Sarah whispered. Stay with Tommy. Before Jake could protest, she slipped out of the room, pulling the door closed behind her. Richard stood at the nurse's station impeccably dressed, despite the early hour radiating impatient authority as he leaned over the counter. Richard, Sarah called, her voice carrying down the corridor. I'm not missing, as you can see. Richard turned, surprise quickly masked by a practiced smile. Sarah, thank goodness. When you weren't at your apartment, I grew concerned, especially after our conversation yesterday. How thoughtful, Sarah replied, her tone ice cold. She approached slowly, maintaining distance between them. And how did you know to look for me here? Richard's smile didn't waver. Lucky guess. Small towns have limited places to hide. He glanced at her attire, the once pristine white suit now rumpled from the night's events. You look tired, Sarah. Perhaps we should discuss the board meeting over coffee. My car is outside. I'm not going anywhere with you. Something dangerous flashed in Richard's eyes. Don't be difficult. We both know you're out of your depth here. Whatever misguided crusade you've embarked on, it's not too late to step back. Sarah moved closer, lowering her voice to ensure only Richard could hear. Let me be perfectly clear. I know everything about biosynth, about the lithium deposits, about my father. And in approximately, she checked her watch, 4 hours the board will know too. Richard's carefully constructed facade cracked genuine shock bleeding through. Your father, you can't possibly. I have the documents, Richard. All of them, including those that mysteriously disappeared from Meridian's servers. The hospital corridor seemed to fade away as they faced off, years of corporate maneuvering distilled into this one confrontation. Richard recovered quickly, his expression hardening. Think carefully about what you're doing, Sarah. This isn't just about some quaint trailer park or your new mechanic friend. This is about billions in potential revenue, about securing America's lithium supply chain. The board won't side with sentimentality over profit. Perhaps not, Sarah conceded, but they will care about potential criminal liability, environmental violations, securities fraud. The FBI tends to take a dim view of executives who mislead shareholders. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Richard's face. You wouldn't. You'd destroy everything you've built. To stop you, yes, I would. Sarah stepped closer, her voice dropping further. And one more thing, Richard. If anything else happens to Jake or Tommy Miller, anything at all, I will personally ensure that every document, every email, every recording I have goes directly to the federal prosecutors. Are we clear? Richard's jaw tightened, but he nodded almost imperceptibly. Crystal clear. I'll see you at the board meeting, Sarah. May the best executive win. He turned on his heel and strode toward the exit, his back rigid with controlled fury. Sarah exhaled slowly, the adrenaline of confrontation leaving her slightly shaky. She had just burned her last bridge with Richard. From this point forward, it was all-out corporate warfare. And she had just 4 hours to prepare for the battle that would determine not only her future, but the future of Millbrook and everyone in it. When she returned to Tommy's room, she found him dozing, the excitement and trauma of the night finally catching up with him. Jake stood by the window, dawn breaking behind him in streaks of pink and gold. Richard, he asked quietly. Gone for now, Sarah confirmed, closing the door softly. But he knows I'm planning to expose everything at the board meeting. Jake studied her face. Are you still going through with it? I have to. It's the only way to stop them permanently. She glanced at Tommy's sleeping form. How is he? They want to keep him for a few more hours for observation standard procedure. He'll be released this morning. Jake rubbed the back of his neck, tension evident in every line of his body. Sarah, about the meeting. I understand if you need to stay with Tommy, she interjected quickly. Claire can drive me. That's not what I was going to do. Jake moved closer, lowering his voice to avoid disturbing Tommy. I want to come with you. Sarah blinked in surprise. To the board meeting, Jake, that's not necessary. This is my fight. His eyes held hers steadily. Because from where I'm standing, this stopped being just your fight the moment Richard sent someone to shoot up my home. The moment my son ended up in a hospital bed because of your corporate power struggle. Sarah flinched at the harshness of his words. But Jake wasn't finished. I'm not blaming you, he continued softer now. I'm saying we're in this together. All the way. The sincerity in his voice took her breath away. In her world of corporate machinations and strategic alliances, genuine solidarity was rare. People aligned themselves with her power, her influence, not with her cause, and certainly not with her as a person. "What about Tommy?" she asked, a final token resistance. "Mrs. Henderson is already on her way. She feels terrible about the accident and insists on taking him home with her when he's released." Jake's expression softened as he glanced at his sleeping son. "He'll be safe there. Richard has no reason to involve him further, especially now that you've drawn your line in the sand." Sarah nodded slowly, decision made. "All right, together then." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning beyond the immediate crisis. Together. It was becoming a dangerous promise, one that stirred hopes Sarah hadn't allowed herself in years. The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation. Claire arrived at the hospital with fresh clothes for Sarah, not corporate attire this time, but something equally powerful. A simple black dress, tailored blazer, and low heels. Practical, but authoritative. "Thought you might want something that makes a different statement," Claire explained with a knowing smile. "Less corporate shark, more woman of the people." Sarah changed in the hospital bathroom, studying her reflection critically. The woman who stared back was neither the polished CEO of Meridian Development nor the lost amnesiac in borrowed clothes. She was someone new, someone forged in the crucible of the past week's revelations. By the time Tommy was officially discharged with strict instructions to "take it easy, young man," they had formulated a plan. Claire would take Tommy to Mrs. Henderson's, then meet with her editor to prepare the expose on Biosynth and Meridian, ready to publish the moment Sarah gave the signal. Jake would accompany Sarah to the board meeting not as a participant, but as a visible reminder of what was at stake. The human face of the community Meridian and Biosynth planned to destroy. "Remember," Jake told Tommy, as they prepared to part ways in the hospital parking lot. "What do we say if anyone asks about Sarah?" Tommy recited dutifully, "Sarah who? I don't know anyone named Sarah." Then he broke into a mischievous grin. "I'm being a secret agent, right, Dad?" Jake ruffled his son's hair, careful to avoid the side with the bruising. "Exactly. The best secret agent in Millbrook." Sarah knelt to Tommy's level, mindful of her dress. "Thank you for being so brave, Tommy. When all this is over, maybe we can finally finish that puzzle." Tommy's expression turned serious. "You promise you'll come back? Both of you?" The simple question carried the weight of a child who had already lost one parent, who understood at some fundamental level that people sometimes didn't return. Sarah felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "We promise," she said solemnly, and felt Jake's hand settle on her shoulder in silent affirmation. The drive to Meridian's headquarters took just over an hour, most of it spent in comfortable silence. Sarah reviewed documents on her phone, occasionally sharing crucial details with Jake. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the last traces of night, as if nature itself was participating in the unveiling of long-hidden truths. Meridian Development occupied the top 5 floors of a sleek glass tower, its logo a stylized mountain peak illuminated against the skyline. As Jake pulled into the underground parking garage, Sarah felt a familiar tension settle between her shoulder blades, the weight of leadership, of decisions that affected hundreds of lives. "Impressive," Jake commented, taking in the gleaming luxury vehicles that surrounded his weathered pickup truck. "No wonder development is so profitable." Sarah smiled tightly. "The board believes in projecting success. Image is everything in this world." "And what image are you projecting today?" Jake asked, turning off the engine. Sarah considered the question, her hand resting on the door handle. "The truth, no matter how uncomfortable." They rode the elevator in silence, Sarah using her security badge to access the executive floor. The familiar ping announcing their arrival sent a jolt of adrenaline through her system. Game time. Mia was waiting in the corridor, tablet in hand, her professional composure betrayed only by the slight widening of her eyes at the sight of Jake. "They're all here," she reported briskly. "Richard arrived 20 minutes ago. He's been closeted with Jenkins and Lowell, your 2 weakest supporters on the board." "And the package I asked for?" Sarah inquired. Mia handed her a slim leather portfolio. "Everything you requested, plus the latest projections I ran last night." "The numbers don't lie, Sarah. Don't. If you can get them to actually look at them." "That's my job," Sarah acknowledged, accepting the portfolio. She made introductions quickly. "Mia Jiang, my chief of staff, Jake Miller from Millbrook. They exchanged nods, mutual assessments passing between them in a glance. Mia's expression shifted from curiosity to something like approval. "The board is expecting you alone," she warned, eyeing Jake. "The board will have to adapt," Sarah replied simply. "Are we ready?" At Mia's nod, Sarah squared her shoulders and moved toward the boardroom doors. Just before entering, she felt Jake's hand catch hers, a brief, firm pressure. "Remember," he said quietly, "whatever happens in there, Pineview is still standing. We're still standing." The simple reassurance steadied her. With a deep breath, Sarah pushed open the doors and stepped into her future. The Meridian boardroom fell silent as Sarah entered, Jake a step behind her. 12 faces turned toward them, some surprised, some wary, all evaluating. Richard sat at the far end of the polished table, his expression carefully neutral, despite the unexpected presence of Jake. Sarah, Walter Drummond, the board chairman, rose to greet her. "We're relieved to see you well. There has been concern about your absence." "Thank you, Walter," Sarah replied smoothly, taking her position at the head of the table. She gestured to Jake. "This is Jake Miller, a stakeholder in our Millbrook development. I've invited him to observe today's proceedings given their direct impact on his community." A murmur rippled through the room. Richard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "This is highly irregular," he objected. "Board meetings are confidential and we have sensitive business matters to discuss." "Indeed we do," Sarah agreed. "Extraordinarily sensitive matters that directly concern Mr. Miller and hundreds of other Millbrook residents." She turned to the chairman. "Unless there are objections from the majority." Walter glanced around the table, reading the room. Most board members appeared curious rather than oppose their business instincts, sensing drama worthy of their attention. "No objections," Walter declared after a moment. "Mr. Miller may stay with the understanding that certain financial discussions may require his temporary absence." Jake took a seat against the wall behind Sarah, but within her peripheral vision, a silent support and reminder of what was at stake. "Now," Walter continued, "I believe we should address the elephant in the room. Sarah, your unexpected disappearance caused considerable disruption. Richard has raised concerns about your health and decision-making capacity." "I imagine he has," Sarah replied calmly. She opened the portfolio Mia had prepared, removing a medical report. "For the record, I suffered a minor concussion during the recent snowstorm. My physician has cleared me completely. I am fully capable of performing my duties as CEO." She passed the report to Walter, who skimmed it before nodding. "That addresses the medical concerns. However, there remains the question of your apparent change of direction regarding the Millbrook development. Richard reports that you've expressed reservations about a project you previously championed." "Not reservations, Walter. Revelations." Sarah stood, commanding the room's attention. "What I'm about to share will be difficult for some of you to hear, but as directors of this company, you deserve the complete truth." For the next 30 minutes, Sarah methodically presented the evidence she and Claire had uncovered: the secret partnership between Meridian and Biosynth, the lithium deposits beneath Millbrook, the environmental catastrophe their extraction would cause, and most damning of all, Richard's deliberate concealment of these facts from both Sarah and the board. As she spoke, she watched the faces around the table transform from skepticism to shock to the carefully blank expressions of executives calculating new risks and opportunities. Richard remained stone-faced, though a muscle jumped in his jaw with increasing frequency. "These are serious allegations," Walter said when she finished. "Richard, would you care to respond?" Richard rose slowly, buttoning at his suit jacket, a power move Sarah recognized from countless negotiations. "I'm disappointed, Sarah. Truly, it seems your accident has affected your judgment more severely than your doctor realizes." He shook his head with practiced regret. "Yes, Biosynth is a development partner. Yes, there are valuable mineral rights involved. These are standard business arrangements that Sarah herself has approved in numerous other projects." "Not like this," Sarah interjected. "Not with deliberate concealment of environmental impacts that would destroy an entire region." Richard continued as if she hadn't spoken. "The board should know that Sarah's sudden environmental awakening coincides rather conveniently with her developing personal relationship with Mr. Miller here." He gestured dismissively toward Jake. "While I sympathize with her humanitarian concerns, they cannot supersede our fiduciary duty to shareholders." The implication hung in the air that Sarah's judgment was compromised by personal feeling that her opposition was emotional rather than rational. It was a calculated attack designed to undermine her credibility with the numbers-focused board. Sarah felt a flash of anger quickly controlled. This was exactly the reaction Richard wanted to paint her as emotional unstable. Instead, she turned to Mia, who had entered silently during the presentation. "The financial projections, please." Mia distributed tablets to each board member, the screens displaying complex spreadsheets and graphs. Sarah allowed them a moment to scan the data before continuing. "These are 20-year projections for Meridian under two scenarios. The first assumes we proceed with Richard's biosynth partnership in the lithium extraction. Initial profits are substantial, approximately 30% higher than our standard developments." She paused, letting the impressive numbers sink in. The second page shows year 5 through 20. The board members swiped to the next screen, their expressions darkening as they processed the data. "As you can see," Sarah continued, "by year 7 we face mounting environmental litigation costs. By year 10, regulatory penalties and remediation requirements. By year 15, Meridian Development exists primarily as a defendant in class action lawsuits. These projections are based on Biosynth's actual performance in 3 previous locations with similar operations." Walter removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Richard, did you analyze these long-term impacts?" Richard's composure slipped momentarily. "Walter, these projections are speculative at best, fear-mongering at worst. The lithium market alone will be dominated by more environmentally sustainable extraction methods within a decade." Sarah interrupted, sliding another document across the table. "The University of Chicago study published last month. The destructive methods Biosynth employs will be obsolete and legally indefensible long before we see the promised returns." For the first time, uncertainty rippled visibly through the board. Numbers were their language, risk assessment, their religion. Sarah had just demonstrated that Richard's plan threatened the one thing they valued above all else: long-term profitability. "There's something else the board should consider," Sarah added, her voice quieter now. "Tomorrow morning, the Millbrook Gazette will publish an expose on Biosynth's environmental record and their connection to Meridian. Similar stories are ready to run in national publications. The public relations impact would be significant." Richard slammed his hand on the table. "This is blackmail. She's threatening the company she's supposed to be leading." "I'm protecting it," Sarah corrected firmly, "from your short-sighted greed and my own past willingness to prioritize profit over people." She looked around the table, meeting each board member's eyes. "I founded Meridian to build things that last, that contribute to communities. Somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that mission. I'm reclaiming it today." A heavy silence fell over the boardroom. The tension was palpable as the directors weighed options, calculated risks, reassessed allegiances. Walter finally broke the silence. "I believe we need to deliberate privately on this matter. Sarah, Richard, if you would both step outside." As Sarah and Richard exited to opposite sides of the boardroom, Jake rose to follow Sarah. In the corridor outside, Mia waited anxiously. "How did it go?" she asked. "Hard to say," Sarah admitted. "They're deliberating now." Jake studied her face. "You did everything you could, laid out the facts, the risks. If they still choose Richard's path, then we move to Plan B," Sarah finished grimly. "The public exposure Claire is preparing. It won't save Meridian, but it might save Millbrook." The minutes stretched painfully as they waited. Sarah paced the corridor, mentally reviewing her presentation, searching for arguments. She might have strengthened weaknesses she should have addressed differently. Jake leaned against the wall, a steady presence in her peripheral vision. Mia worked her phone, monitoring news feeds and stock tickers with practiced efficiency. The boardroom doors finally opened. Walter emerged, his expression unreadable. "Sarah, the board requests your return. Alone, please." She exchanged a quick glance with Jake, drawing strength from his silent support, then followed Walter back into the room. The atmosphere had shifted, the tension now underlaid with something that felt like resolution. Richard already sat at the table, his posture rigid, eyes fixed straight ahead. After careful consideration, Walter began once Sarah was seated. "The board has reached several conclusions. First, regarding the Millbrook development, we have voted to suspend all activities pending a complete environmental and financial reassessment by an independent third party." Sarah exhaled slowly, careful to maintain her professional composure despite the surge of relief. A suspension wasn't a cancellation, but it was a vital first step. Second, Walter continued, we find the evidence of deliberate information withholding by Mr. Parker to be deeply troubling. Richard, your employment with Meridian Development is terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you to clear your office. Richard's face drained of color. This is outrageous. I've generated more profit for this company than the potential losses your actions could have caused. Walter interrupted coolly. The board disagrees. That will be all, Richard. Two security officers appeared in the doorway, their presence leaving no room for further protest. Richard rose stiffly, buttoning his jacket with trembling fingers. You'll regret this, he said quietly, his gaze fixed on Sarah. All of you. After Richard was escorted out, Walter turned back to Sarah. Which brings us to our third conclusion. The board acknowledges your transparency in bringing these matters to our attention. However, we have concerns about the unorthodox methods you employed during your absence and questions about your ongoing leadership approach. Sarah felt her heart sink. This was the moment she'd been preparing for the potential corporate consequences of her personal evolution. I understand, Walter. We are therefore requesting a detailed presentation of your revised vision for Meridian Development to be delivered at next month's meeting. Until then, you will remain CEO, but major decisions will require board approval. It wasn't a dismissal, but it was a leash, a probationary period during which Sarah would need to prove that her new perspective didn't threaten Meridian's fundamental purpose as a profit-generating enterprise. Thank you, Walter. I accept these terms. The meeting concluded shortly thereafter, the board members filing out with nods of varying warmth towards Sarah. Some seemed genuinely pleased with the outcome, others clearly reserving judgment until they saw how the situation developed. Walter was the last to leave. For what it's worth, he said quietly at the door, I think you did the right thing today. But the board will need convincing that ethics and profit can coexist. That's your challenge now. When Sarah emerged from the boardroom, she found Jake and Mia in intense conversation, both looking up expectantly as she approached. Richard's out, she announced without preamble. The Millbrook development is suspended pending review, and I'm on probation, but still CEO. Mia's professional reserve cracked into a genuine smile. That's better than we projected. The board almost never reverses course this dramatically. They didn't have much choice, Jake commented. Sarah gave them the one thing corporate boards fear more than loss of profits, public accountability. Sarah felt a curious mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The immediate crisis was averted, but the real work transforming Meridian into the company she now wanted it to be was just beginning. We should contact Claire, she said, reaching for her phone. Let her know to hold the story at least temporarily. We can use it as leverage during the review process if needed. As she dialed, Mia touched her arm lightly. Sarah, your calendar for the rest of the day has been cleared as you requested. The executive car is waiting whenever you're ready to go home. The simple phrase carried a wealth of meaning. Go home. But where was home now? The luxury apartment that had never felt like more than a place to sleep between meetings, or the modest trailer in Pineview, where she had experienced more genuine connection in a week than in years of corporate success. The question must have shown on her face because Jake stepped closer. His voice pitched for her ears alone. Tommy will be expecting us for dinner. Mrs. Henderson is making her famous pot roast to celebrate his battle wound, as she's calling it. Us. The word wrapped around Sarah's heart with unexpected warmth. She nodded, decision made. Tell the driver we won't need the car, Mia. We have our own transportation. As they drove back toward Millbrook, the tension of the past days gradually melted away. Sarah rolled down her window despite the winter chill, letting the fresh air clear her head. The landscape transformed from urban sprawl to rolling countryside, then to the familiar pine forest surrounding Millbrook. Each mile seemed to peel away a layer of her corporate persona, revealing the woman underneath. What happens now? Jake asked, breaking the comfortable silence. With Meridian, I mean. Sarah considered the question, watching the scenery pass. I have a month to convince the board that Meridian can be profitable without being predatory. That responsible development isn't an oxymoron. Can you convince them? I don't know, she admitted, but I have to try. Too many people depend on Meridian employees, contractors, communities where we build. I can't just walk away. Jake nodded, understanding in his eyes. And what about after you convince them? Where does that leave you? The question hung between them, laden with unspoken possibilities. Where would she live? How would she balance the demands of running a major corporation with the connections she'd formed in Millbrook? What was developing between her and Jake, and was there any realistic future for it? I don't know that either, Sarah said softly. I've spent 5 years with a 10-year strategic plan for Meridian, but I never really planned my own life beyond the next quarter's results. Jake's laugh was gentle without judgment. Welcome to the club. After Lisa died, my strategic plan became making it through each day with Tommy. Anything beyond that felt impossible. And now, Sarah asked, a vulnerability in her voice she rarely allowed herself. Jake was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the road, but his thoughts clearly elsewhere. Now I'm thinking maybe it's time for a new plan, one that includes more than just surviving. The implication warmed Sarah more than any corporate victory ever had. They were approaching something profound, a possibility neither had anticipated when she'd woken in his home with no memory of her past. As they crested the hill overlooking Millbrook, the small town spread before them in the afternoon light. From this distance, it looked timeless, unchanging, the church steeple, the town square, the scattered neighborhoods, and beyond them, the modest collection of homes that made up Pineview. It's beautiful, Sarah murmured, seeing the landscape with new eyes. It's home, Jake replied simply. They were halfway down the hill when Sarah's phone rang Maya's ringtone. She answered, putting it on speaker. Sarah, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something you need to know immediately. Mia's voice was tense professional control, barely containing alarm. Richard's been busy since the board meeting. He's made 3 calls to Harold Wells at Biosynth, then emptied his personal investment accounts, over $2 million transferred to an offshore entity. Sarah frowned. He's running, not surprising given the circumstances. That's not all, Mia continued grimly. I just received a notification that someone used his executive access codes to download all files related to the Millbrook development, including geological surveys and property acquisition details. A cold dread settled in Sarah's stomach. Biosynth doesn't need Meridian anymore. Not if they have all our research and property maps. Jake's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel as understanding dawned. They could approach landowners directly, make offers themselves. Exactly, Mia confirmed. And there's one more thing. Richard had a standing reservation at Lakeside Inn in Millbrook. He confirmed it an hour ago. Sarah and Jake exchanged alarmed glances. Richard wasn't running away. He was heading straight for Millbrook. Call Claire, Sarah instructed Mia, urgency sharpening her voice. Tell her to run the story now, full exposure of Biosynth's plans and environmental record. Then contact Walter. The board needs to issue a public statement disavowing any connection with Biosynth immediately. Already on it, Mia assured her. Be careful, Sarah. Richard has nothing left to lose. As Jake accelerated toward town, Sarah's mind raced through scenarios, calculating risks and responses with the strategic focus that had built Meridian. But this wasn't about corporate maneuvering anymore. This was about protecting real people. Jake, Tommy, Mrs. Henderson, the entire community of Pineview. We need to warn everyone, she said, already typing messages to Claire. If Richard and Biosynth start approaching people with cash offers today, they'll target the most vulnerable first, Jake finished grimly. The Garcias, old Mr. Peterson, the widow's circle. People who can't afford to say no to quick money. The truck rounded the final curve toward Pineview, and Jake abruptly slammed on the brakes. Ahead, a cluster of black SUVs blocked the entrance to the trailer park. Men in business suits stood talking to residents, documents in hand. We're too late, Sarah whispered, horror dawning as she recognized the Biosynth logo on the vehicles. They've already started. Jake's expression hardened with determination. No, we're right on time. As they prepared to confront this new threat, Sarah realized that the corporate battle she'd won this morning was just the beginning. The real fight for Millbrook and for her own future was about to begin. Jake's truck skidded to a halt at the edge of Pineview gravel, spraying beneath the tires. The scene before them was like something from an invasion film. Black SUVs with tinted windows parked at strategic points throughout the trailer park, men in expensive suits moving from door to door with clipboards and briefcases. They're making offers, Sarah said, her corporate mind immediately recognizing the tactic. Quick cash, minimal paperwork, pressure to sign immediately. Jake was already out of the truck, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Mrs. Henderson has Tommy. I need to get to them." Sarah grabbed her phone, dialing Mia with one hand while opening the truck door with the other. "I'll coordinate with Claire and Mia. We need to get the word out, stop people from signing anything." They split up without another word, Jake heading directly for Mrs. Henderson's pale yellow trailer on the far side of the park, Sarah moving toward the community center, where several residents appeared to be gathering. She kept Mia on speakerphone as she walked, her heels sinking into the soft ground. "The story is live." Mia reported, her voice clipped and professional despite the crisis. Claire pushed it to print and online simultaneously. "Local TV stations are picking it up now." "Good. What about Walter and the board?" "Emergency statement being drafted. Walter is personally calling key investors to contain the damage." "But Sarah," Mia hesitated. "Richard's offshore transfers were larger than we initially thought. Almost $5 million. Whatever Biosynth is paying him, it's significant." Sarah processed this information with a grim nod. "He's burning every bridge. Make sure security has locked him out of all Meridian systems completely. And Mia, contact legal. I want injunctions filed within the hour against Richard, against Biosynth, against any property transfers in Millbrook County." "Already on it." "What are you going to do?" Sarah watched as an elderly woman emerged from her trailer, clutching papers and looking bewildered as a Biosynth representative guided her toward his vehicle. "Whatever it takes," Sarah replied, ending the call. Inside the community center, the atmosphere was chaotic. Residents huddled in small groups, some studying documents with furrowed brows, others arguing heatedly. Claire Patterson stood on a chair at the front of the room, trying to command attention. "Please, everyone, you need to hear this before you make any decisions." Sarah slipped in quietly, assessing the situation. Approximately 30 residents were present, mostly older folks, those most vulnerable to pressure tactics. Near the back door, she spotted two men in Biosynth corporate attire watching Claire with barely concealed irritation. "Ms. Chen," one of them called out, spotting Sarah. "Quite a surprise to see you here. I was under the impression you were no longer involved with the Millbrook project." Heads turned, conversations halting as recognition spread. Sarah lifted her chin, stepping forward with the confident stride that had carried her through countless boardrooms. "That's correct," she replied evenly. "Meridian Development has suspended all Millbrook operations pending review," which means, she raised her voice to address the entire room, "that any offers being made today by Biosynth Industries are completely separate from Meridian and have not undergone proper legal or environmental scrutiny." "That's not entirely accurate," the Biosynth representative countered smoothly. "We're simply continuing the development work already begun. The offers we're making are generous, well above market value." "Because you're not buying homes," Sarah fired back. "You're buying mineral rights to extract lithium using methods that will destroy the groundwater and render this entire region uninhabitable within a decade." A murmur ran through the crowd. Claire seized the moment, holding up her phone. "The full story is published. Biosynth has a documented history of environmental devastation. 3 communities in Nevada, 1 in New Mexico, all left with contaminated water and toxic soil after Biosynth's operations. It's all here." The Biosynth representatives exchanged glances, their practiced smiles faltering. One reached for his phone, stepping outside to make a call. The other attempted damage control. "These are inflammatory accusations without context. Biosynth is committed to responsible resource development and community partnership. Is that why you're pressuring elderly residents to sign away their rights without legal representation?" Sarah challenged, her voice carrying across the room. "Is that why you've deployed teams within hours of Richard Parker's termination from Meridian, hoping to secure contracts before the truth emerges?" The room had grown silent, all eyes fixed on the confrontation unfolding between Sarah and the Biosynth representative. Sarah could sense the uncertainty in the room, people caught between the temptation of unexpected cash offers and the warnings being raised. Mrs. Garcia, a small woman with silver-streaked black hair, stood up from her chair in the front row. "They offered us $75,000 for our trailer, said we could be out by the end of the month with cash in hand." Her voice trembled slightly. "It sounded like a miracle. But if what you're saying is true—" "It is true," Claire confirmed gently. And while $75,000 might seem like a lot, now it won't cover new housing costs in an uncontaminated area, let alone medical expenses if the water supply is compromised. The front door of the community center burst open and Jake strode in, Tommy and Mrs. Henderson following close behind. Tommy's blue cast stood out vividly against his winter coat, his eyes wide as he took in the tense gathering. "They're at the Garcia house now," Jake announced, slightly breathless. "Pushing papers, talking about immediate payment. I told them to wait until Mr. Garcia gets home from work." The biosynth representative, who had remained inside, straightened his tie, composure slipping. "This is a private business matter between Biosynth Industries and interested property owners. These interruptions are inappropriate and potentially actionable." "Actionable?" Claire echoed incredulously. "You want to talk about actionable? How about fraud, misrepresentation, environmental crimes?" As if on cue, the community center door opened again. This time, Sheriff Davis entered, his weathered face serious beneath his department-issue hat. "Afternoon, folks," he said, nodding to the room at large before focusing on the biosynth representative. "Sir, I'm going to need to see any permits or authorizations you have for conducting business solicitation in Millbrook County." The representative faltered, glancing toward the door as if contemplating escape. "Our paperwork is in order, if you'll allow me to retrieve it from my vehicle." "That won't be necessary," came a new voice from the doorway. Richard Parker stepped into the community center, impeccably dressed despite the casual setting. "Sheriff, my name is Richard Parker. I represent Biosynth Industries in this matter. All necessary permits were filed this morning." Sarah felt a cold fury rise within her at the sight of her former colleague. "Filed but not approved, I imagine, and certainly not with full disclosure of Biosynth's intentions." Richard's gaze shifted to Sarah, a flicker of genuine hatred visible before his professional mask reasserted itself. "Sarah, still interfering in business that no longer concerns you, I see." "It concerns everyone in this room," Sarah replied steadily. "Everyone in Millbrook." Sheriff Davis looked between them, sensing the deeper conflict. "Mr. Parker, I've just received some concerning information from the county commissioner's office about potential environmental impacts not disclosed in your permit applications. Until this is clarified, I'm instructing you and your associates to cease all property solicitations in Millbrook County." Richard's smile tightened. "Of course, Sheriff, we respect local authority, but I should mention that several residents have already accepted our offers." He produced a folder from his briefcase. "Signed contracts, fully legal and binding." A collective gasp ran through the room. Mrs. Henderson stepped forward, her normally cheerful face clouded with worry. "Who signed Judith? Was it Judith Payton? Her memory hasn't been right since her stroke." Richard's expression revealed nothing. "I'm not at liberty to disclose client information, but rest assured all signatories were of sound mind and fully informed." "Like hell they were," Jake growled, moving to stand beside Sarah. "You deliberately targeted the most vulnerable residents first." Tommy slipped his small hand into Sarah's, looking up at her with worried eyes. "Are the bad guys trying to take our homes away?" he whispered. Sarah squeezed his hand reassuringly, though her heart clenched at the fear in his voice. Children shouldn't have to worry about losing their homes about the machinations of corporate greed. Yet here was Tommy already bearing the burden of adult concerns, his arm in a cast because of dangers she had inadvertently brought to his door. "Not if we can help it," she promised him softly. Richard checked his watch with exaggerated precision. "Well, this has been enlightening, but I have other appointments. Sheriff, you'll be hearing from Biosynth's legal team regarding these baseless accusations and the interference with legitimate business activities." He nodded curtly to the remaining Biosynth representative. "Jenkins wrapped things up here." As Richard turned to leave, Sarah stepped forward. "Richard, wait. You don't have to do this. Whatever Biosynth is paying you, it's not worth destroying your reputation, your career." Richard paused, turning back with a cold smile. "My career? You ended my career this morning, Sarah. 5 years of making Meridian profitable, of navigating complex deals and partnerships, all erased because you had a crisis of conscience after hitting your head." His voice dropped, intended for her ears alone. "This isn't business anymore. This is personal." With that parting shot, he exited the community center, leaving a charged silence in his wake. Sheriff Davis cleared his throat. "Folks, I recommend nobody sign anything until the county legal department reviews these contracts and permits. Ms. Patterson, I'd appreciate a copy of that article you published." As the sheriff and Claire conferred, the remaining residents broke into worried discussion groups. Jake guided Sarah, Tommy, and Mrs. Henderson to a quiet corner. Some people already signed, Mrs. Henderson reported anxiously. The Paytons, old Mr. Collins, and I think the Watsons, too. They've been struggling since Bill lost his job at the factory. Jake ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. We need to figure out if those contracts can be voided, and we need to make sure no one else signs. Sarah's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Mia again. I have to take this, she said, stepping slightly away from the group. The injunctions are filed, Mia reported without preamble, but they'll take time to process. In the meantime, Walter has authorized an emergency measure. She paused. Sarah, the board has approved a counteroffer program. Meridian will match any biosynth offer to Millbrook residents with the condition that the property remains with the current owners or for a minimum of 5 years. Sarah blinked in surprise. The board approved this, without extensive risk assessment, without profit projections. Walter made a compelling case about long-term reputation management and corporate responsibility, Mia explained. And frankly, Richard's actions forced their hand. The board is furious about his defection to biosynth. It makes them look incompetent for having trusted him. A plan began forming in Sarah's mind. How quickly can we get the paperwork together and legal representation for the residents? The corporate jet is already on its way with our legal team. ETA 90 minutes. I've emailed you the preliminary offer structure for review. Perfect. Keep me updated. Sarah ended the call, turning back to Jake with renewed determination. We have reinforcements coming. Before she could explain further, the community center door burst open once more. A man in his 60s wearing the uniform of the Millbrook Water Authority rushed in, his face flushed with exertion. Sheriff, you need to see this right now. Sheriff Davis crossed quickly to meet him. Calm down, Frank. What's happened? Biosynth trucks at the reservoir, Frank reported breathlessly. Big drilling equipment. They're setting up some kind of testing operation. They've got permits I've never seen before, claiming county approval for water quality assessment. The sheriff's expression darkened. Those permits were not issued by my office or the county commissioner. Claire joined them, her journalist instincts activated. The reservoir supplies drinking water for the entire region. If they're already moving equipment in, they're establishing a foothold, Sarah realized aloud, creating facts on the ground before opposition can organize. She turned to Jake. This is bigger than just buying properties. They're moving on multiple fronts simultaneously. Jake nodded grimly. Classic siege tactics. Divide the opposition, create confusion, exploit any weakness. Sheriff Davis was already heading for the door. I need to get up there, see these permits itself. Miss Patterson, you might want to bring your camera. I'm coming too, Jake said firmly. Sarah hesitated, glancing at Tommy. The boy stood quietly beside Mrs. Henderson, trying to look brave despite the worry evident in his eyes. She knelt to his level. Tommy, I need to go with your dad to help stop the bad guys. Will you be okay staying with Mrs. Henderson a little longer? Tommy nodded solemnly. Are you coming back? The simple question carried echoes of their earlier conversation at the hospital. The fear of abandonment that Sarah now recognized lay just beneath his resilient exterior. Always, she promised, squeezing his good hand. Your dad and I are a team now. We'll both be back. Mrs. Henderson placed a protective hand on Tommy's shoulder. We'll be fine. I've got half a pie left from yesterday and some board games that haven't seen daylight in years. As they prepared to leave, Jake pulled Sarah aside. You don't have to come. This could get ugly, and you've already risked enough today. Sarah straightened her blazer, a quiet determination in her eyes. I'm the one who brought this fight to your door, Jake. I'm seeing it through. Besides, she added with a hint of her CEO confidence, I know exactly how corporations like Biosynth operate. You need me up there. The drive to the reservoir took 20 minutes along winding forest roads, their convoy of vehicles, Sheriff Davis's patrol car. Jake's truck was Sarah and Claire's compact sedan, moving with urgent purpose. Sarah used the time to review Mia's proposal and make several crucial calls, her corporate efficiency deployed now in defense of the community she had so recently planned to dismantle. As they crested the final hill overlooking the reservoir, the scale of Biosynth's operation became clear. 3 large trucks with drilling equipment were positioned near the water's edge. A team of workers in company uniforms moved with practiced efficiency, setting up what appeared to be a testing station. Two black SUVs, identical to those they'd seen in Pineview, were parked nearby, suited executives consulting clipboards and smartphones. Sheriff Davis parked his patrol car directly in the access road, effectively blocking any additional vehicles from entering. Jake pulled up behind him, and Claire's car completed the blockade. "Stay behind me," the sheriff instructed as they approached the operation. "Let me handle this initially." A man in a biosynth windbreaker detached from the group, moving to intercept them. "This is a private operation, Sheriff, authorized by county permits." He held out a document with official-looking stamps. Sheriff Davis examined the paper carefully. "This permit has Commissioner Bradley's signature, but it's dated today. Bradley's been out of town at a conference since Monday." The biosynth supervisor's confidence wavered slightly. "I just work with the paperwork I'm given, Sheriff. If there's a problem with the authorization, you'll need to take it up with management." "I intend to," Sheriff Davis replied grimly. "In the meantime, all operations here are suspended until proper verification can be obtained." As they spoke, Sarah scanned the site with a practiced eye, noting details that might escape casual observation. The equipment was excessive for simple water testing, designed for deep geological assessment rather than water quality sampling. Near one of the SUVs, she spotted a familiar figure in conversation with what appeared to be the operations supervisor, Harold Wells, CEO of Biosynth Industries. Sarah had met him only twice during her tenure at Meridian, both times at industry events, where his reputation as a ruthless businessman had been evident beneath his charitable public persona. His presence here at what should have been a routine preliminary operation confirmed her worst fears about the scope of Biosynth's ambitions for Millbrook. And beside him, gesturing animatedly toward the reservoir, stood Richard. "Jake," Sarah murmured, nodding discreetly toward the pair. "That's Harold Wells, Biosynth CEO. His being here personally means this operation is their top priority." Jake followed her gaze, his expression hardening. So much for Richard's other appointments. He came straight here. The confrontation between Sheriff Davis and the site supervisor was escalating, voices rising as workers paused their activities to watch. Claire had her phone out, documenting everything with quick professional photographs. The tension in the air was palpable, the standoff balanced on a knife's edge. Then Harold Wells noticed their presence. He straightened, adjusting his tailored overcoat before striding toward them with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. Richard followed a step behind, his expression darkening when he spotted Sarah and Jake. "Sheriff Davis," Wells greeted smoothly, extending his hand. "Harold Wells, CEO of Biosynth Industries. I understand there's some confusion about our permits." "Not confusion, Mr. Wells. Fraud." The sheriff did not accept the offered handshake. "That signature was falsified, and you know it." Wells's smile didn't falter. "A serious accusation, Sheriff. I'm sure there's a simple administrative explanation. In the meantime, perhaps we could discuss this privately without—" His gaze swept over Sarah, Jake, and Claire. "Unnecessary complications. These people have every right to be concerned about operations affecting their water supply," Sheriff Davis replied steadily. "And Ms. Patterson here is with the press." At the mention of media presence, Wells's expression cooled noticeably. "I see. Well, transparency is one of Biosynth's core values. We have nothing to hide." He turned his attention to Sarah. "Ms. Chen, this is unexpected. I was under the impression that your interest in Millbrook had concluded with your departure from the Meridian project." "My interest in preventing environmental catastrophe is ongoing," Sarah replied evenly, "as is my interest in exposing corporate malfeasance." Richard stepped forward, unable to contain himself. "She's no longer involved, Harold. Just a disgruntled executive with a personal vendetta." "A disgruntled executive with evidence of your conspiracy to defraud landowners and contaminate the regional water supply," Sarah countered, holding up her phone, "including recorded conversations between you and Biosynth executives dating back 3 years." It was a bluff. She had emails and documents, but no recordings. Yet the flash of alarm that crossed Richard's face suggested there were indeed damaging conversations that could have been captured. Wells maintained his composure, though a muscle twitched near his eye. "Ms. Chen, whatever corporate dispute exists between you and Mr. Parker is of no concern to Biosynth. We are simply pursuing legitimate business interests in a region with valuable resources. Resources you plan to extract using methods that would poison the groundwater and destroy this community." Jake interjected, stepping forward. We've seen the environmental impact reports you tried to bury. We know about West Ridge, Nevada, and Pine Top, New Mexico. Wells's expression hardened the veneer of civility thinning. And you are Jake Miller, Pineview resident, and someone who won't let you destroy our home. Admirable sentiment, Mr. Miller. Misguided, but admirable. Wells checked his watch with exaggerated casualness. However, time is money, and this operation is proceeding on schedule. Sheriff, I suggest you consult with your county legal department before making accusations of fraud. Biosynth has very capable attorneys. Sheriff Davis stood his ground. Until I receive verification from Commissioner Bradley himself, this operation is suspended. I'm ordering your people to pack up and leave the reservoir immediately. I'm afraid I can't do that, Wells replied coldly. We have contractual obligations and timelines to meet. The standoff intensified, neither side willing to back down. Sarah could sense the calculations running behind Wells' eyes, weighing the cost of negative publicity against the delay in operations, assessing whether a small-town sheriff would actually arrest the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. The tension was broken by the distant sound of vehicles approaching. All heads turned as a convoy appeared on the access road, 3 Meridian Development SUVs, followed by a black town car with tinted windows. Ah, Sarah said with a small smile. It seems our reinforcements have arrived ahead of schedule. The vehicles parked alongside the existing blockade, and a team of professional-looking men and women in business attire emerged. Sarah recognized Janet Jo Meridian's chief legal counsel leading the group with purposeful strides. Ms. Chen, Janet called as she approached. We have the documents you requested. Wells's confidence visibly faltered as he assessed the new arrivals. More Meridian interference. This is becoming tiresome. Not interference, Mr. Wells. Competition. Sarah accepted a folder from Janet, opening it to reveal official-looking documents. Meridian Development is exercising its right of first refusal on all properties in the Millbrook watershed as established in our original development agreement with the county. Richard stepped forward, alarm breaking through his composure. That's impossible. Those clauses were never activated. They were activated this morning, Sarah corrected, when the board voted to suspend the original development plan and implement environmental protections as part of our corporate responsibility initiative. She handed copies of the documents to Sheriff Davis and Claire, then faced Wells directly. Additionally, Meridian is extending protection offers to all Pineview residents, financial security without displacement. Our legal team is already meeting with those who signed preliminary agreements with Biosynth, advising them of their right to rescind within the 72-hour cooling-off period required by state law. Wells's face had gone very still, the only movement a slight tick at the corner of his mouth. You're bluffing. Meridian wouldn't sacrifice profits for environmental sentimentality. Perhaps the old Meridian wouldn't, Sarah acknowledged, but companies can evolve. People can change. She glanced briefly at Jake, drawing strength from his presence. Sometimes it takes nearly losing everything to recognize what truly matters. For a long moment, no one spoke. The tableau held Sarah and Jake flanked by Meridian's legal team facing Wells and Richard, with Sheriff Davis and Claire bearing witness. In the background, the Biosynth workers had stopped all pretense of continuing their operation, watching the confrontation with undisguised interest. Finally, Wells broke the silence with a short, humorless laugh. Impressive maneuvering, Ms. Chen. I underestimated your adaptability. He buttoned his overcoat, decision made. We'll withdraw for now, but this isn't over. Lithium is too valuable a resource to remain untapped, especially with the current market demands. There are other extraction methods, Sarah countered, sustainable ones that don't destroy communities. Perhaps Biosynth should invest in those instead. Wells offered no response beyond a curt nod before turning to the site supervisor. Pack it up, we're done here today. As the Biosynth team began dismantling their equipment, Richard remained frozen in place, the full impact of his miscalculation dawning on him. He had betrayed Meridian for a partnership that was now in jeopardy, burned bridges that could never be rebuilt. Richard, Sarah said quietly, it's not too late to cooperate with the authorities about Biosynth's methods. Your testimony could help prevent this from happening to other communities. His laugh was bitter, defeated. Always the savior now, aren't you, Sarah? The crusading CEO with a conscience. He shook his head. You've won this round, but don't get comfortable. Business isn't about making friends or saving small towns. Eventually, you'll remember that. As Richard walked away to join Wells at the SUVs, Jake moved to stand beside Sarah. You think Biosynth will really back off? For now, Sarah replied, watching the operation being dismantled. Wells is pragmatic. He'll retreat, reassess, look for other weaknesses to exploit. But we've bought time and created legal obstacles that will be difficult to overcome. Sheriff Davis approached, returning the documents Sarah had provided. Impressive work, Ms. Chen. I didn't think corporate types could move this fast. We can, when properly motivated, Sarah smiled. And please call me Sarah. As the biosynth vehicles began pulling away from the reservoir, Claire joined them, her phone still recording the retreat. This is quite a story. Corporate CEO switches sides to save small town. Mind if I quote you for the follow-up article? Sarah hesitated, glancing at Jake. His eyes held hers steadily, supportive but not pressuring. The decision, as always, was hers to make. Quote me, Sarah agreed finally, but make sure to emphasize that this wasn't one person's work. It was a community standing together, refusing to be bullied or bought. As they walked back to their vehicles, the afternoon sun broke through the winter clouds, casting long shadows across the reservoir surface. Sarah paused for a moment, taking in the peaceful scene, the water reflecting the surrounding pines, the distant hills framing the small town of Millbrook. It's beautiful here, she said softly. I never really looked before. When I first evaluated this site, all I saw were property values and development potential. Jake stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. And now I see a home, Sarah replied simply. Not just buildings or land, but people connected to each other, to this place. She turned to face him fully. I see what's worth fighting for. The moment stretched between them, waited with possibility. Then Jake's phone rang, breaking the spell. He checked the screen. It's Mrs. Henderson, he said, answering quickly. Hello, is everything? His expression changed from concern to confusion. Slow down, Mrs. Henderson. What do you mean Tommy's missing? Sarah felt her heart drop as Jake listened intently, his face paling. When did he say anything before? I see. No, you couldn't have known. We'll find him. Yes, right away. He ended the call, already moving toward his truck with urgent purpose. Tommy's gone. Mrs. Henderson went to check on a pie in the oven, came back and found a note saying he was going to help fight the bad guys. He slipped out the back door about 20 minutes ago. He's heading here, Sarah realized with growing dread. He must have overheard us talking about the reservoir. Jake nodded grimly as they reached the truck. The walking path through the woods. It's a shortcut. He knows well. We've hiked it dozens of times. But with his arm in a cast alone, and with biosynth people still in the area, he didn't need to finish the thought. Sarah was already climbing into the passenger seat, her heart racing with fear for the boy who had somehow become so important to her in such a short time. As Jake started the engine, Sheriff Davis approached the window. Problem. Tommy's missing, Jake explained tersely. We think he's headed this way through the forest trail. The sheriff's expression turned serious. I'll coordinate a search from this end. Those biosynth vehicles left in a hurry might not be watching the road carefully. With a quick nod of thanks, Jake pulled away, turning the truck toward a narrow service road that paralleled the forest path. Sarah gripped the door handle, scanning the woods anxiously as they drove. He'll be okay, Jake said, though his white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel betrayed his fear. Tommy knows these woods. He's smart. He's also 8 years old with a broken arm, Sarah replied, unable to keep the worry from her voice. And there are still biosynth people in the area who might recognize him as your son. The implication hung heavy between them. Richard knew Tommy was Jake's son, Richard who had just suffered a humiliating defeat and had explicitly stated that his conflict with Sarah was now personal. Jake accelerated the truck, bouncing over the rough service road with jarring force. There's a viewpoint about halfway along the trail. Tommy always stops there. We might intercept him. As they rounded a curve in the road, Sarah suddenly grabbed Jake's arm. Stop! Look! Through the trees, a small figure in a blue jacket was visible, making his way carefully along the forest path. Tommy, his casted arm held protectively against his chest, his face set with determination as he headed toward the reservoir. A relief flooded through Sarah so intense it left her momentarily dizzy. Thank God. Jake slammed on the brakes and was out of the truck in seconds, calling his son's name. Tommy looked up, surprise and then sheepishness crossing his young face as he realized he'd been caught. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. A black SUV appeared on the main road below, moving fast. It slowed suddenly as it drew parallel to Tommy's position on the trail. The rear window lowered and Sarah caught a glimpse of Richard Parker's face, his expression tight with fury as he recognized the boy. "Jake!" Sarah screamed in warning, already running toward Tommy. Jake reacted instantly, sprinting down the slope toward his son. Tommy, sensing the danger, froze in confusion, looking between his father and the SUV. Richard's arm extended from the window, pointing not a weapon, but a phone, its camera aimed directly at Tommy. Even from a distance, Sarah could see the cold calculation in Richard's expression. He was documenting the boy, marking him as a target for future retribution. In that moment, something fundamental shifted within Sarah. All her corporate training, all her strategic thinking narrowed to a single imperative: protect Tommy at all costs. She changed course, racing directly toward the SUV rather than the boy. Her heels sank into the soft forest floor, but she barely noticed, propelled by a protective fury she had never experienced before. "Richard," she shouted, diverting his attention from Tommy. "It's over. Leave them alone." Richard's gaze snapped towards her, his expression contorting with a mixture of surprise and malice. The SUV began to accelerate, but not before Sarah reached the road, planting herself directly in its path. The vehicle swerved at the last moment, tires skidding on the damp asphalt. Sarah caught a final glimpse of Richard's face, shocked, furious, before the SUV fishtailed and then righted itself, speeding away down the road. In the sudden silence, Sarah became aware of her racing heart, the adrenaline coursing through her system. She turned to see Jake reaching Tommy, gathering his son into a tight embrace. The boy's face was buried against his father's chest, small shoulders shaking with delayed fear or relief. Sarah approached slowly, not wanting to intrude on their moment. But Tommy looked up as she neared, his eyes wide. "You stopped the bad guys," he said with childlike awe. "You weren't scared at all." Sarah knelt beside them, her designer clothes now smudged with forest dirt, her carefully styled hair coming loose. "I was terrified," she admitted, "but sometimes being brave means doing what's right, even when you're scared." Tommy considered this with serious concentration. "Like when I got my cast, the doctor said I was brave even though I cried a little." "Exactly like that," Sarah smiled, fighting back unexpected tears. Jake looked at her over Tommy's head, his expression a complex mixture of gratitude, admiration, and something deeper, something that made Sarah's heart race for reasons entirely unrelated to adrenaline. "You could have been hurt," he said quietly. "So could Tommy," she replied simply. In that moment, with the winter sun filtering through the pines and Tommy safe between them, Sarah realized that she had crossed a line from which there was no return. She had risked herself instinctively to protect this child who was not hers, this family that had taken her in when she was lost. Whatever happened next, whoever she might be tomorrow, or the day after, this truth would remain: she had found something in Millbrook worth more than all the corporate success she had ever achieved. She had found home. 6 months later, the summer sun cast dappled shadows through the oak trees surrounding Pine View Community Park, once a modest playground with rusting equipment, now transformed into a vibrant gathering space with new benches, garden plots, and a small amphitheater. Residents milled about, carrying potluck dishes to long tables decorated with wildflowers and hand-painted signs announcing Pine View Celebration Day. Sarah adjusted the banner hanging across the park entrance, stepping back to ensure it was straight. "Community-owned, community-grown," proclaimed the colorful letters painted by Tommy's class at Millbrook Elementary. "Looks perfect," Jake said, coming up behind her. He slipped an arm around her waist, a gesture that still sent a pleasant warmth through her body even after months together. "Though I'm pretty sure Mrs. Henderson will find a way to straighten it again when we're not looking." Sarah laughed, leaning into his embrace. "She's already rearranged the dessert table twice. Something about proper presentation hierarchy for baked goods." Jake's chuckle rumbled against her shoulder. Some things never change, thankfully. And yet so much had changed in the months since that confrontation at the reservoir. As if sensing her thoughts, Jake nodded towards a group of children playing near the new climbing structure. Tommy at their center, his once broken arm now fully healed, demonstrating some complicated game involving pine cones and invisible force fields. "He hasn't had a nightmare in almost 2 months, Jake said quietly. "Not since Richard's sentencing." Sarah nodded, relief and satisfaction mingling at the memory. Richard Parker's attempt to intimidate Tommy had backfired spectacularly. When Biosynth realized the extent of Richard's actions, from falsifying permits to orchestrating the shooting incident at Jake's trailer, they had distanced themselves immediately, leaving Richard to face federal charges alone. The evidence Sarah had gathered, combined with Richard's increasingly erratic behavior, had resulted in a 5-year prison sentence for fraud, environmental violations, and criminal intimidation. And Biosynth? Jake asked, following her train of thought. Still fighting the EPA sanctions, but they have abandoned any interest in Millbrook. Sarah smiled slightly. Having their methods and environmental record exposed in national media was apparently bad for the stock price. They've suddenly become very interested in sustainable extraction technologies. Jake snorted. Amazing how financial consequences can trigger moral awakenings. Speaking of financial matters, Sarah set her tone lightening as she turned in his arms to face him. The final community trust paperwork came through yesterday. Pine View is officially resident-owned in perpetuity. No corporation can ever buy it out. Jake's face brightened with genuine joy. You did it. We did it, Sarah corrected. The whole community did it. I just provided the legal framework. She didn't mention the substantial personal investment she had made to establish the trust or the career risk she had taken by fundamentally changing Meridian's approach to development. Some sacrifices didn't need acknowledgement. They were simply the right thing to do. Across the park, Claire Patterson waved to catch their attention, gesturing toward the small stage where Mayor Wilson was testing the microphone. The celebration ceremony was about to begin. Showtime, Jake murmured, taking Sarah's hand as they made their way through the gathering crowd. Neighbors greeted them warmly, a stark contrast to the suspicious glances Sarah had received during her first days in Millbrook. Now they called her by name, they asked about her week, shared small details of their lives, with the easy familiarity of true community. Tommy broke away from his game to join them, slipping between Sarah and Jake with the unconscious confidence of a child who knew his place was secure. Dad, can I ring the bell when Mayor Wilson calls my name? I've been practicing the perfect victory ding. Jake ruffled his son's hair affectionately. I'm sure the mayor will be impressed by your dinging skills, buddy. As they found seats near the front, Sarah spotted Mia arriving at the park entrance, looking slightly out of place in her business attire among the casual summer clothes of the Millbrook residents. Sarah waved her over. You made it, she exclaimed as Mia joined them. I thought the board meeting might run long. Walter adjourned precisely on schedule, Mia replied with a small smile. He sends his regards and says the quarterly impact report exceeded expectations. She handed Sarah a manila envelope. The final signatures for the Sustainable Development Initiative. All 10 regional projects have been approved with the new environmental standards. Sarah accepted the envelope, a sense of quiet accomplishment washing over her. The initiative represented months of work convincing Meridian's board that responsible development could be profitable in establishing new frameworks that prioritize community involvement and environmental sustainability. It hadn't been easy, but the results were beginning to speak for themselves. Thank you, Mia, for everything. The words encompass far more than just the delivered documents. They acknowledge the countless hours Mia had spent helping Sarah reshape Meridian while managing her new living arrangement in Millbrook. Mia's professional reserve softened into genuine warmth. It's a good path, Sarah. Different, but good. Her gaze swept over the community gathering, lingering on Tommy's animated conversation with Jake. It suits you. Before Sarah could respond, Mayor Wilson's voice boomed over the speakers. Friends and neighbors, welcome to Pine View Celebration Day. 6 months ago, our community faced an unprecedented threat. Today, we celebrate not just our survival, but our transformation into something stronger, more united and more sustainable than ever before. Applause rippled through the crowd. Sarah listened as the mayor recounted the events that had brought them to this point. The biosynth threat, the community's resistance, the innovative trust structure that now protected their homes. He didn't sugarcoat the challenges they'd faced or the work still ahead, but his tone carried the unmistakable note of a community that had discovered its own strength. And now, Mayor Wilson continued, I'd like to recognize some individuals whose extraordinary efforts made today possible. First, our own Claire Patterson, whose fearless journalism exposed the truth when we needed it most. Claire rose to accept the community's applause, her normally serious expression softening with emotion as Mrs. Henderson presented her with a hand-embroidered sash that read, Millbrook Truth Teller. Next, Sheriff Davis, whose integrity and courage stood firm against corporate pressure and kept our community safe. The sheriff acknowledged the recognition with a modest nod, accepting a similar sash that proclaimed him Millbrook Protector. One by one, community members were called forward and honored for their contributions. Mrs. Henderson for organizing resident meetings, Mr. Garcia for rallying neighboring communities to the cause, the Millbrook Elementary students for their letter-writing campaign to state officials. And now, Mayor Wilson said, his voice taking on a special warmth, I'd like to recognize the Miller family, Jake, Tommy, and Sarah, whose combined courage, ingenuity, and determination were at the heart of our community's victory. Tommy tugged excitedly at both their hands as they made their way to the stage. Sarah hesitated briefly at the steps, suddenly conscious of her inclusion in the Miller family. She and Jake had been building their relationship deliberately carefully. She had moved into his trailer only 2 months ago, and while Tommy had embraced the arrangement with enthusiastic acceptance, they hadn't formally defined their family status. Jake seemed to sense her momentary uncertainty. He paused, turning to face her with a question in his eyes. Then, in full view of the entire community, he took both her hands in his. You are family, he said simply, his voice low enough that only she could hear. In every way that matters. The knot of emotion in Sarah's throat made it difficult to speak. She managed a nod, blinking back unexpected tears as she squeezed his hands in response. Tommy, oblivious to the moment's weight, was already bounding onto the stage to accept his Millbrook Young Hero sash and ring the ceremonial bell with enthusiastic vigor. The sound pealed across the park, bright and clear in the summer air, drawing laughter and applause. When it was Sarah's turn to receive her sash Millbrook Champion, Mayor Wilson added a personal note. 6 months ago, Sarah Chen arrived in our community under extraordinary circumstances. She could have returned to her previous life without looking back. Instead, she chose to fight for a place and people she had only just met, and in doing so, helped us create a new model for community preservation that's being studied nationwide. The applause that followed held a special quality, not just appreciation, but acceptance. As Sarah looked out over the gathered faces, she recognized a truth that had been gradually taking shape in her heart. She wasn't just living in Millbrook. She belonged here. After the ceremony concluded and the community celebration shifted to food and music, Sarah found a quiet moment with Jake near the edge of the park. The late afternoon sun bathed everything in golden light, the sounds of laughter and conversation creating a perfect backdrop. So, Jake said, slipping his arm around her waist again, Meridian's board approved all 10 projects with the new standards. That's a big win. Sarah nodded, leaning against his shoulder. It's working, Jake. We're proving that development doesn't have to mean destruction, that profit and community well-being can coexist. And the CEO commuting from a trailer park, how's that working? Sarah laughed softly. Better than expected, though Walter did suggest that my rural immersion experience might make an interesting feature in the annual report. Jake's eyebrows rose. Is that what we're calling it now? An immersion experience? I told him I prefer to call it coming home. She turned to face him fully, her expression growing more serious. Jake, these past months, finding myself, finding you and Tommy, finding this community, it's been the most real thing I've ever experienced. Something shifted in Jake's eyes, a decision crystallizing. He took her hands in his, much as he had on the stage earlier. Sarah, I've been carrying something around for weeks, waiting for the right moment. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small, worn velvet box. This was Lisa's. Before she died, she made me promise that if I ever found love again, I wouldn't let fear hold me back. Sarah's breath caught as he opened the box, revealing a simple silver ring with a small, perfect sapphire. It's not fancy or expensive, Jake continued, his voice husky with emotion, but it's been in Lisa's family for generations. She wanted it to continue its journey. Jake, Sarah whispered, her heart pounding. I'm not asking for an immediate answer, he said quickly. I know our situation has complicated your career, the commute, all the adjustments we're still making. But I want you to know that Tommy and I were all in. Whenever you're ready, however you want to define our family, this ring is yours. Sarah looked past him to where Tommy was engaged in an animated conversation with Mia, who appeared to be receiving very serious instructions about the proper technique for water balloon launching. Beyond them, the community she had helped save continued their celebration, people whose names and stories she now knew intimately, whose lives had become intertwined with her own. 6 months ago, she had awakened in Jake's trailer with no memory, no identity, only the vague sense that she was running from something important. Now she understood the truth she hadn't been running from, but toward authenticity, toward connection, toward a life that aligned with her deepest values rather than her strategic ambitions. Sarah gently took the ring box from Jake's hand, removing the sapphire ring and slipping it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. "I'm ready now," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion tightening her chest. "I've never been more ready for anything in my life." Jake's smile illuminated his entire face as he pulled her close. Their kiss was witnessed by the setting sun, by the community that had become their shared home, and by Tommy, who noticed from across the park and came racing over with a whoop of excitement that made several nearby adults laugh. "Does this mean we're officially a family now?" he demanded, looking between them with bright eyes. Sarah knelt to meet his gaze, taking one of his hands while Jake took the other. "We've been a family for months, Tommy. This just makes it official on paper, too." Tommy considered this with the solemn wisdom of childhood. "Good," he declared finally, "because I already told everyone at school that you're my mom now." Mrs. Patterson said sometimes families find each other in unexpected ways, and that's the best kind of story. As the summer evening deepened around them, Sarah reflected that Mrs. Patterson was right. The best stories weren't about corporate success or financial achievement. They were about lost souls finding their way home, about communities standing together, about families formed not by circumstance but by choice. And this story, her story, was still being written one day at a time in a small town that had taught her the true meaning of success.